Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Thank you to Peter Carwell. Back tomorrow morning right here at the home of Common Sense. What have we got this afternoon? What haven't we got this afternoon? Nigel Farage accusing the BBC. We broke this story yesterday as it happened. He's accused them of hypocrisy after a presenter asked Richard Tice about claims Farage made racist or anti-Semitic remarks at school. We'll get into that in just a bit. Straightforward question here. Does the BBC have questions to answer? I'd like your thoughts on that and the wider issue as well. We'll come to that in a few moments. Also this afternoon, experts have warned the number of illegal migrants in Britain remains unknown. What a surprise. This is as ministers admit they lack the basic tracking data, and the Home Office does not record human rights-based applications or grants. All the stuff you just kind of assumed probably happens actually doesn't happen, and then you find these kind of headlines. There's a lot to look into on that. And David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, has repeatedly refused to rule out future customs union returns, implying it could aid growth. What does this mean? Lammy going full-on pro-Brexit despite us voting to leave the EU 9 years ago. Details to come, everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. There's never really a day when the BBC doesn't come under the spotlight in some shape or form. Do they have questions to answer on this one? And I guess there is another aspect of all of these kind of BBC type stories. Do we blame when something happens at the BBC? Now, this is the state broadcaster, so the bar is correctly set higher than most. It's the state-funded broadcaster. And therefore, by dint of that definition and that fact, they are held perhaps to a higher account. Also being the state-funded broadcaster, it employs about 6 gazillion people. So when something kicks off over there at the BBC, do we blame the BBC or do we blame the individual? I mean, let's be honest, if Alex Jones on the One Show suddenly starts swearing like a navvy in the middle of interviewing the bloke from Boyzone, do we blame the BBC or do we blame Alex Jones? You hear what I'm saying here? And this is in kind of similar territory. Yesterday, and we played you the clip at the time, and we will play it again shortly. Nigel Farage accused the BBC of hypocrisy after a presenter questioned his relationship with Adolf Hitler. We'll listen to that in just a second. This was an interview on Radio 4, so it's their flagship programme. The presenter was a woman called Emma Barnett. I'll declare I used to work with Emma Barnett. I haven't seen her for a number of years, but a very diligent broadcaster. In fact, we've even played clips of Barnett previously when she's done a sterling job of tearing a new one of a certain politician or whoever it happens to be. But on this one, she got it horribly wrong. So there they are, the Deputy Leader of the Reform Party, Richard Tice, friend of this show, friend of mine, being interviewed by one of their top presenters, Emma Barnett. And of course, we already knew there was some contention around things that might have been said 50 years ago when Nigel Farage was at school. And it's with that backdrop that Emma Barnett decided to ask Richard Tice this.
Let's talk about your leader, Nigel Farage's relationship when he was younger with Hitler, shall we? Because 20 people told The Guardian... 20 people told The Guardian that Nigel Farage behaved in a racist and anti-Semitic way.
So could you just hear that first bit again, please?
Let's talk about your leader, Nigel Farage's relationship when he was younger with Hitler, shall we?
With Hitler? His relationship with Hitler. Now, that is called editorialising in the trade. That is not an objective question that you would pose, even taking into account the subject matter. Stuff apparently happened in the playground when Nigel Farage was at school, and some people, totally understandably, by the way, are not happy with that. But that is a BBC interviewer asking that question in the most loaded and mischievous manner. Let's just hear that bit again.
Let's talk about your leader, Nigel Farage's relationship when he was younger with Hitler, shall we?
With Hitler? His relationship with Hitler? Wow. I don't think I've heard Peter Mandelson or the likes being questioned quite so robustly about his relationship with a paedophile. Peter Mandelson, I should remind you, still sits in the House of Lords. 0344 499 1000. So you're familiar with the story, and I'm happy to get into this story as well, because there are some stories out there. If you've got a brain, you're able to wear more than one hat. And this is a classic example. So Nigel Farage faces allegations that he engaged in racist and anti-Semitic behaviour while he was a pupil at Dulwich College, which is a South London private school, very established and esteemed place of education it is. He's denied making any racist remarks after the asked about the interview at a press conference yesterday afternoon, and we brought this to you as it happened. The Reform leader said, "I cannot put up with double standards of the BBC about what I'm alleged to have said 49 years ago and what you are putting out on mainstream content." Now, this debate on that particular aspect, I want to talk about does the BBC have a question to answer on that specific point? But this debate is actually a lot about, and none of this, by the way, and I'm going to underline this and highlight it in big, bold, yellow pen, none of this undermines an individual's experience that is harrowing, disturbing, hurtful and horrendous that might have happened 5 years ago or 50 years ago. If you're on the receiving end of severe amounts of insults in whatever form it might be, for some kids that will stay with them. And when somebody says that, look, that's my experience, that's what happened to me, and there are people who've gone on TV explaining what happened to them, then I have an understanding and a sympathy, genuinely, how horrific that might be. And it doesn't matter what the reasoning is behind it, whether it is about the colour of your skin, whether it's about your religion, whether it's about your sexuality, whatever it happens to be. Stuff as a kid, I can think of a couple of things as a kid, of things that were said to me, not in this respect, that have always stuck with me. I don't live my life by them, they don't keep me awake at night, but once in a while you ponder, you go, I remember when that was said, and it's still there. So if something fairly robustly and horrendously is said in your direction, even if it's said as a kind of a joke, even if it's said from a distance, rather than somebody putting you up against a wall, tying you to a chair and shouting abuse at you, however, in whatever form it came, that individual has a right to feel the impact of that. So we don't dispute that. Simultaneously, a 13 or a 14-year-old has the right to be an idiot at school, because that sometimes goes with the territory. It doesn't in any way justify anything, but it absolutely explains everything. And of course, if we don't follow that, what we're essentially suggesting is that no kid, no young teenager can ever learn from their mistakes, and they shall be tarred and marred with those mistakes for the rest of time. I think we can all agree that would also be silly. So Nigel Farage said a couple of weeks ago, he denies these very specific remarks, as I understand it. But he'd said, I probably said some stuff in the playground, whatever. And he did come back with a fairly good, I thought, his response that, well, hang on, this was the 1970s. And in that era, he listed things that were on TV, things the BBC was showing at the same time that Nigel Farage was alleged to have said similar things in a playground. And that's a really powerful kind of example, an equivalence that he was drawing between the kind of things that were said then and the sort of things that would never be said now. I mean, to talk about the black and white minstrels, it ain't half hot, mum, till death us do part. God knows how many other questions. The P word, the P word was in Only Fools and Horses. In the 1980s, it was used. I mean, the list goes on. So it's really a debate about offence as well. But it's also a debate about context, about time, as in an era, and about age. I don't think we can remove that from this. That doesn't justify anything that might have been said, but it does explain it. So I'd like your opinion on what's your view on what somebody, if somebody was a bully at school, let's just take the specific, just a bully, not in any certain, not to do with any certain theme or attribute of somebody's characteristics or nationality or religion, just a bully. Are we saying that a school bully remains a school bully for the rest of time. And they shall be forever marked out as that. Are they not able to say, God, I was a right arse when I was at school. I was horrible to some kids. And I don't know why. It was obviously some kind of insecurity or whatever the hell it was. I was rotten to, you know, poor little Graham in year 8 or something of that nature. So do we therefore have to suggest that that person can never concede to that, never apologise? And there's the problem. So we have that to deal with. 0344 499 1000. You might have been that kid in the playground that got some very specific kind of insults hurled at you, and I don't dispute that can still hurt now if you think about it too much. But simultaneously, you might have been the child that was dishing it out and went on to be a fine, upstanding human being. But there's also the BBC aspect of this. When a BBC interviewer asks the deputy leader of a major political party, let's talk about Mr. Farage's relationship with Hitler when he was younger. I mean, that is editorialising an interview. That, I think, probably breaches the BBC's own... I was trying to remember what the code is in this respect. I think it crosses a line. Of course, people at the BBC will defend it and go, no, it doesn't. I mean, she could have said, let's talk about Mr. Farage's alleged remarks about Hitler. And that would have been within context. Let's talk about Mr. Farage's relationship with Hitler. That's a whole different ballgame territory, right? Does the BBC have questions to answer? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this from Henry Hill, Deputy Editor at Conservative Home. Henry, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. It's a contentious one, this, on a number of levels. Let's remind ourselves again of what the interviewer on Radio 4 asked Richard Tice when talking about this.
Let's talk about your leader, Nigel Farage's relationship when he was younger with Hitler, shall we? Because 20 people told The Guardian...
I'm sorry?
20 people told The Guardian that Nigel Farage behaved in a racist and anti-Semitic way.
Well, that's what Emma Barnett asked Richard Tice, and of course this boiled over to a press conference the following afternoon where Mr. Farage called the line of questioning despicable and denied ever acting with any sort of racist intent.
I'm sick to death of the double standards and hypocrisy, above all, of your organisation. And what happened on the Today programme this morning was a complete bloody disgrace. Next, Sam Coates from Sky News. No, I'm done with you, thank you. Until you apologise for all of your output, your appalling output, at the same time that I'm accused of saying these things which I deny, I'm not speaking to you. All right?
So that all kicked off yesterday, Henry. Do we blame the BBC, do we blame Emma Barnett, or do we blame nobody at all?
So it's really an indicator, just another sign of the really difficult position that the BBC is in as a state-funded broadcaster with all sorts of advantages over private media, because from a purely sort of gotcha journalistic perspective, it's a fairly good way to ask the question if you're looking to get the stiletto in under the ribs of your opponent and get a sort of surprise response. But the BBC is a state-funded organiser, and as you say, you can imagine, and you indeed spelled out, the sort of Reithian way in which you would approach this question. It would be dry, it would be slightly boring perhaps, but you'd say, well, your leader's alleged comments about da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But if you want to go for the shock stuff, that's really what the private media is for, because the BBC is paid for out of everyone's taxes, and so that does impose restraints on it. So it was a good journalistic question for a private media show, but I don't think one for the BBC.
And it was clearly mischievous, right? I mean, I don't think anyone can deny that. It was asked. I can imagine Emma Barnett sitting there and preparing it and writing it specifically in this way. It didn't come off the top of her head.
No, and mischief has its place in journalism, right?
Correct. In the right place.
Yeah, exactly. If you're interviewing somebody, actually, especially these days when politicians tend to be so drilled and prepped and formulaic in response to interviews, a little bit of mischief is often what you need to knock them off their script a bit and get a good answer. So again, absolutely no problem with the question in general, but the BBC is the state-funded broadcaster, and you can see why Reform UK would respond as it has. There's already this siege mentality on the part of Reform. You know, they've been alleging that the Labour government has delayed all of these local elections specifically because Reform was going to win them. And this is just going to be another part of another brick in that wall. And I think that that's a real shame. I am sort of broadly a defender of the BBC. I think it's an important institution. It has a lot of problems, but reform is still first place in the polls, right? And there's really no reason to think that it's not going to be a big part, at least, of the British right for the foreseeable future. And what you don't want is that party absolutely despising an institution like the BBC, which is extremely vulnerable to any government deciding to change how it's funded.
When it comes to the question that she asked, is that if we were going to point a finger, and you know we both agreed that, Henry, that it probably does cross a line because it's the BBC, do we blame the BBC or do we blame the individual journalist?
Well,
or are they inextricably linked?
I mean, so I guess forensically determining that would depend on knowing things about how that show is put together that I don't know. Because did she sign off her line of questioning with her editor in advance? Is this a question, was this brought up in the editorial meeting for the show? If so, the BBC has an element of corporate responsibility for that. If not, and this is simply something that she decided to do, then it's harder to blame the BBC for that because, of course, this was live, as I understand, live radio.
Yeah.
And you can't, if your presenter decides to go off script for whatever reason, it's one of the perils of live broadcasting. I don't even know if the BBC have that they probably have that 5-second delay in case something absolutely horrifying happens, but this wasn't that. And so, yeah, unless it was signed off by her editors, I think that this would not really be a BBC problem.
I mean, ordinarily, in that scenario, it would be, the editor would arguably have, or the producer would have arguably written the question. Now, Emma Barnett, fairly autonomous character, on any other day, a very diligent journalist, she would be within her rights to put in her own question as well. So whether she phrased it in a specific way, I guess we will never know the answer to that. I don't imagine in the Radio 4 newsroom right now they're particularly perturbed that they crossed any kind of line. But the more I think about it, and having worked there, albeit for about half an hour, I'm pretty convinced it does cross a BBC line. It's editorialising a question. There's no objectivity in that question. It's clearly loaded in all manner of ways. But we'll see how it pans out. I'd like to hear more from the BBC on this. Henry, stay with us. More stories still to come. Henry Hill is Deputy Editor at Conservative Home. We'll come to him. We'll come to you as well. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. The Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. Watching and listening to Talk just got easier. There's now only one place for the home of common sense. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 23 minutes after 1 o'clock. Henry Hill still with us. Let's look at this story, Henry. Extraordinary, really, but maybe not surprising. Experts have warned the number of illegal migrants in Britain remains unknown. Ministers lack the basic tracking data that you would need, and the Home Office does not record human rights-based applications or grants. So there's huge gaps, also leaving unclear the impacts on public services, local areas and crime. It's unbelievable they don't keep a record on this stuff. I mean, OK, you could argue by definition, if somebody has snuck in and you don't know they're there, then you can't count them. I understand that bit, but these are some of the people they do know that are there.
Yeah, there are, apart from Russian spies, apparently, there aren't that many people with a sort of handkerchief on a stick on cargo ships sneaking off in the middle of the night to get into the country. Nearly everyone who gets here in some form of route that is official. But it's only extraordinary until you know anything about the British state. One of the things the British state does is stop collecting inconvenient data. This happens across a whole range of sectors, from, childhood outcomes and abuse of certain things, all manner of stuff. Eventually, either the data is, they change the way they collect it, so all of a sudden the data is on a non-comparable basis and you can't draw a line that shows how much worse things have got, or they stop collecting it altogether. And with immigration, it's always been a very particular problem because the Home Office's estimates of who comes in and out are estimates. They're based on sending some people to count ins and outs and then sort of extrapolate it outwards. There is no system for properly tracking who comes in and out of the country.
Yeah.
One of the really consistent things whenever you have somebody who is quote unquote here illegally, that normally, well, not normally maybe, but often doesn't mean that they arrived here illegally. That is a subset problem with the boats, but it means that they are here illegally now. Why? Because they overstayed their visa.
Yeah.
And we don't know how many people that is because we just don't track it.
And you would think that in that case it would be something really, I've just got an email in the last half an hour from a company that I bought something from a while ago, and they're telling me it's your last chance to use up your 150 points that you've got. After today, they're no longer available to you because they know when I applied for something or bought something, and they know because of their database when it runs out. So do the Home Office not have a slightly more advanced version of that pings and says, Gabrielle Smithers, who was meant to have left in July, has not left? Because we would know that because the passport checkout would chime with the Home Office system that would correlate the dates. But that doesn't exist.
I mean, that's 2 points, I suppose. One, the Home Office has no financial incentive to track down people, right? Because actually it just means, and this is a general problem with when people ask, why does things work differently in the public versus the private sectors? Is it because business is so much more efficient? But it's also just a question of incentives. That business wants to get more of your money. For the Home Office, a visa overstay is more work. Right? It's more space in the detention facilities that they don't have.
Of course
it's more work for the visa processing people that they don't have enough of. But also, you say a more advanced system. It really is worth emphasizing here. You could do this system in Excel. I, who am no great IT genius, could do this system in Excel because there is a function where you put one date in one column and then you say in the next column, generate a date X amount of time away. And so if someone's here on a 2-year visa, you'd have a line, it would say date issued, and then it would have date expired. And then you'd hit sort by date and go after them. It really wouldn't be, at the very basic level, technically complicated to do.
Absolutely. And as I said there, if supermarkets and retailers can be on this like a dog, as they are when they know about your account and what it's doing, and something's going to expire and something is about to kick, if they can do it, the Home Office can't. Extraordinary. Let's go to this story as well. David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, has repeatedly refused to rule out future customs union return, implying it could aid growth. The row comes, of course, as the OBR links Brexit to weaker productivity and the Treasury downgrades growth. While some advisers urge exploring a customs union rethink, critics warn of a backdoor EU return. Let's have a listen.
Our future is inextricably linked to the European Union, and we
part
should,
of the customs union,
and we should be working deliberately over time to be closer. That's my view.
Would you like to see us in a customs union or a single market?
That journey of travel to me is self-evident.
So the question, customs union?
That is not currently
Would you welcome
our policy. That's not currently where we are.
But should it be?
But you can see countries like Turkey with a customs union seemingly benefiting and seeing growth in their economy.
That's David Lammy. Of course, as Justice Secretary, he can't rule out or in our future of the customs union in any authentic respect, Henry. What does it mean when a Labour frontbencher says something like this? How significant do we take his words? Is he speaking on behalf of the Cabinet?
No. Good Lord, no. I mean, one, it's important to remember this is David Lammy, a man who once called Brexiteers Nazis and then refused to recant that statement, so clearly stands by it. So David Lammy's views on the European Union...
And he called Donald Trump a Nazi as well, I think.
He's very fond of calling people Nazis, but one of the groups that he considered to be Nazis are all the people who voted Leave, which must be a really terrible country to live in if you think like that. But essentially, the problem is now that Labour there's some polls that put it in fourth place, right? And just like the Conservatives, this puts Labour, which is historically a big traditional party with a broad base of support, in a really horrible position. Because on the one hand, since the Greens elected Zach Polanski, who is well to the left, the Greens have always had a bit of a hybrid identity, but they've gone well to the left. That means that in urban areas and in southern areas and in sort of small L liberal areas, Labour is now losing votes to the Greens. So they're worried about that. They want to know what to do about that. But on the other hand, Reform came second in 98 seats in the general election, and 89 of them are held by Labour MPs, right? That's just second places. On current polling, there are plenty of places where Reform could take a seat from third place. So if Starmer were to reopen the question of Brexit, there would be hundreds of Labour MPs panicking, because it's the one thing, given that Reform's having a slightly bad news cycle, it's the one thing that would be absolute catnip to the right in this country, because they did incredibly well out of it when British politics was polarised around Brexit before. I remember when, covering Theresa May's government, she was managing to lose a Secretary of State a month to completely separate scandals, and the in-joke with journalists was con+2, because it just had no effect on the polling, because the government was committed in some form or another to Brexit, and the opposition was viewed to be opposed to it. So this is just a sign that Labour is now skewered on the same fort that the Conservatives have been on for a couple of years now. They're polling so low that they have to try and chase simultaneously their sort of left-leaning, progressive southern electorate and their more maybe economically left-leaning but culturally right-leaning, more pro-Brexit electorate. And that's going to be a very difficult ask.
A word on this one as well, just a final one, Henry. The government has launched a child poverty action plan centred on scrapping the two-child benefit cap. This, of course, is from next April, expected to lift 450,000 to 550,000 children out of poverty by 2030. It's going to cost a few billion quid to do this. I've never believed this. It's going to lift people out of poverty because you have to firstly establish who is drawing the line on what constitutes poverty, and these sort of man-made lines are always a little bit iffy. If you move somebody just a little bit over it so that they are statistically out of poverty, and you knocked on their door and said, do you feel richer? I reckon those people go, haven't really noticed any difference, to be honest.
Oh, no, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. The two-child limit has been litigated to death, but the fundamental point, which you're quite right to point out, is that this metric for poverty that they're using is called relative poverty, right? There are two poverty metrics. Absolute poverty refers to actual material conditions that people have. Relative poverty simply describes anybody who has an income or assets or whatever of less than a given percentage of the average as in poverty, which means actually the easiest way to lift people out of relative poverty is to confiscate a whole load of wealth from other people and set fire to it. Because if the country becomes generally poorer, but it's the top who are losing out, there will be fewer people in relative poverty.
Yes.
And so I think that this is a worthless...
Because you just move everything downwards, right? So it doesn't make any sense.
This is an equality metric. Yeah. And if you're on the left, that's fine. That's your politics. But this is when people hear poverty, the reason that they came up with relative poverty rather than equality is because people think of genuine material poverty.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're talking about here.
Henry, as ever, thank you for your time. Have a cracking weekend. He is Henry Hill. He's Deputy Editor at Conservative Home. Thank you to him. Over to you. Also on that issue of, when people ask the question about poverty and he talks about the genuine poverty, relative poverty or absolute poverty, all of these different markers and metrics that are kind of thrown out. And you are forced to, when you look around the world, I know these are not always equivalencies, and you think, well, yeah, that one I'm looking at on my TV screen on this horrible documentary is that's kids in poverty in some horrendous backwater somewhere in a part of the third world. Do we have poverty in this country? Do we really have it? And it's interesting that it was never once judged. I've talked about this before. The circumstances that I grew up in, which is a very sort of working class council house upbringing, really no spare money whatsoever, because that's how it was in the kind of 70s and early 80s. It was just nobody at that point described poverty in this way. I often wonder, we might have even been declared by the system to be in poverty. We never felt like that at all. We'd have probably been listed to go to a food bank, but they didn't exist and nobody expected them to exist. And I can tell you there was literally zero benefits or welfare available to us. And I don't imagine my mum or dad ever went and found out, because it was just a given. It didn't really exist in those circumstances. You weren't really in poverty, you just weren't a particularly well-off family, and you struggled week to week, and that was sort of how it was. And if you want to change that, you can try and make it better, but you're not. Nobody would describe my upbringing as poverty. Man, when I look around the houses, the estate that I grew up on, there were probably families that had less, and even there, you go around their house, and you wouldn't think you wouldn't describe it as poverty. That's the curious kind of loaded way we've sort of bolted on the drama to that debate. Notwithstanding people who are genuinely in hard times, we all get that. Thoughts on that? Is anyone in poverty in the UK? 0344 499 1000 and the BBC. Do they have a case to answer? Lines are open. This is Talk.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. Just gone 25 to 2. We are talking about... Well, there's a couple of things on the Nigel Farage story, of course. It's more than just one element to this. There is the BBC element. Have the BBC got a case to answer? And then, of course, there is the wider issue of, stuff you might say at school, and whether you, no matter how distasteful it might be, whether you hold that against somebody for the rest of time. 0344 499 1000. So, Mr Farage, as a result of all this, has been accused of hypocrisy after a presenter asked Richard Tice about claims that Mr Farage had made these racist or anti-Semitic remarks at school. It's really interesting stuff. Have a listen. This is Emma Barnett, presenter on the Today Show. Here's what she asked Richard Tice.
Let's talk about your leader, Nigel Farage's relationship when he was younger with Hitler, shall we?
Now, that's fairly, I would argue, and I think objectively, that is fairly loaded stuff. I don't think that's a very BBC Radio 4 thing. His relationship with Hitler, well out of kilter, I believe, and we'll talk on this a little more to our first guest, but out of kilter with the, if you like, the code of conduct over there at the Beeb. This, of course, has created a bit of a storm, and it culminated yesterday at a press conference. Nigel Farage was giving a press conference in Westminster yesterday afternoon. He was asked about this same issue, and this is what he had to say.
I'm sick to death of the double standards and hypocrisy, above all, of your organisation. And what happened on the Today programme this morning was a complete bloody disgrace. Next, Sam Coates from Sky News. No, I'm done with you, thank you. Until you apologise for all of your output, your appalling output, at the same time that I'm accused of saying these things which I deny, I'm not speaking to you. All right?
Oh, that's what he said. That's fairly unequivocal stuff. Does the BBC have a case to answer? Robin Aitken, former BBC journalist, joins us now. Afternoon to you, Robin. Before we come back to the specifics of Mr Farage, just give us your take on what Emma Barnett, or the manner of the question in which Emma Barnett fired at Richard Tice yesterday.
Appallingly badly phrased, contemptible in a way.
Yeah.
To say his relationship with Hitler. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I think about this, Ian. I think that I do think that there are certain people in the country, the centrists, the liberal left. I think they're genuinely concerned about Farage, and they've stooped now to what I consider to be, as I say, contemptible tactics.
Yeah.
To rake up something which was said in the playground 50 years ago is actually absurd. I mean, in my experience, I don't know if perhaps you can, but I can't remember a politician in this country being confronted with something they have allegedly said when they were a schoolboy. I don't know. Can you think of anybody?
No, I can't. And it's interesting, Robin, that you mentioned that, because I raised this yesterday on the back of the Farage press conference. I said, if we wanted to be, truly authentic in this apparent journalistically valid question, allegedly, then we would have to send some kind of email out to every constituent and say, did you go to school with Bob Smithers? And if you did, do you ever remember Bob between the years of 5 and 11 saying anything that was perhaps unsavoury, swearing, bad language, sexism, homophobia? I mean, how would we... it's ridiculous.
It is. It is truly absurd. As I understand it, having read a couple of biographies of Starmer, he was a red-hot trot when he was a schoolboy.
Yeah.
I mean, are we going to hold him to account for things he might have said then? I think it's a measure of the panic in establishment ranks about reform that they're raking up this stuff. And I thought that Starmer's rejoinder was clever and to the point, because he said, well, look at your own output. in the 60s and 70s. Look at It Ain't Half Hot, Mum. Look at the black and white minstrel show.
Yeah.
Look at Alf Garnett and his racist comments. You know, that was the BBC actually broadcasting to the nation things which these days would be considered by the same people entirely unacceptable.
I have to agree. I thought that was, I mean, it's an obvious comment to make. I thought it was actually a very powerful comparison to make. You know, if we want to get into, you know, I mentioned a little earlier, there's an episode of Only Fools and Horses, probably more than one. This was in the 80s, for goodness sake, where the P word was used by Del Boy. You know, it's now edited out when it's reshown. But, I mean, that was the time. Till Death Us Do Part, all manner of what would now be called, I mean, extreme homophobia, sexism, racism. It was all over the place. You know, It Ain't Half Hot, Mum was a white guy with brown makeup on.
I know. I mean, you know, and I think that it's the very same people who are now alleging that Starmer is a racist, who have...
Farage,
I beg your pardon. Who have raised the level of sensitivity about these issues. So you now, I mean, I think we've gone much too far in this down this road that, you know, hurty words, things which are allegedly racist, you know, people are terribly sensitive about all this stuff. But I do think this, Ian, I think that this charge of racism has lost its pungency. I think that a lot of people have become wiser to the fact that those people who fling about the accusation that their opponents are racist actually have a blunted weapon these days. It might have worked 10 years ago, it might have worked 20 years ago.
Yeah.
These days, I think we see through it because, you know, the fact is that this is just a political slur. Until Farage, look, I'm not a member of his party. I'm not a signed-up voter. I could vote for him, possibly, under certain circumstances, but I'm not a great fan of Farage. But until he does something which is demonstrably racist, in my book, that guy has a clean slate.
Yeah.
And I think it's so wrong, this kind of slurs, these kind of low tactics to smear a man's reputation. I think it's quite wrong. Yeah,
on something that was potentially half a century ago, for goodness sake. And just finally on the BBC itself, I mean, the question that Emma Barnett uttered, you know, I have to say, I mentioned at the beginning, I used to work with Emma Barnett, so I'm familiar with her work. I know she's Jewish. Whether that was any part of it, I don't know. But I would argue, and you know what the old BBC rule book looks like, Robin, there is literally a published thing of what you're meant to say and don't say. I never did get through the whole thing. I think I got through the first page, but I sort of tended to use my head on these things. I think it does cross a line. I mean, I think it editorialised something there that should, you know, you could have legitimately said, if they wanted to go down that line, Mr. Tice, do you think it's relevant what, you know, Mr. Farage is alleged to have said? But to talk about his relationship with Adolf Hitler.
I know.
And that would have been, you know how the Today programme works. I mean, they would have, you know, the editor would be aware of that question, I would imagine. The producer would have been aware of it. I doubt it was just said off the cuff.
No, I'd be prepared to cut Emma Barnett a little bit of slack. I mean, she is Jewish, and of course, she actually used to worship at the synagogue in Manchester where the attack took place a couple of weeks back. I imagine she's feeling very sensitive about that, and I wonder if now she privately might regret the way that she phrased that question. I think it was very clumsily phrased. It was an unfair question. It was a sort of, you know, when did you stop beating your wife?
Yes, it was exactly in that. And the strange thing is, I mean, the irony, Robin, that's the wrong word, irony, always overused or misplaced, but the interesting thing is, that we've previously on this show played clips of Emma Barnett when she's brilliantly destroyed a politician who needed to be called into question over whatever the issue happened to be, and she's done it fantastically. So I think, you know, given, you know, I've no criticism of it generally speaking. Maybe it was a clumsy moment. Final question, do the BBC have a case to answer?
Definitely. I mean, you know, I think that the BBC's long-standing prejudice against right-wing politicians I mean, there are many, many instances of this going back a long, long time. I could list off, I could list a number for you. I won't because it'll take too long. But essentially, I think the BBC has to face up to the new reality of politics in this country. The fact is that if a third of the population, according to opinion polls, is behind Farage, it is not right that an organisation which claims to be impartial should be so very partisan when it comes to questioning people in reform. I mean, they wouldn't use, I bet my bottom dollar that they would not use that same sort of tactic against someone from the Labour Party or someone from the Lib Dems. They just would not. Yeah. So I think the BBC does have it. I mean, this goes back, Ian, to the great scandal which blew up a couple of weeks ago when an internal, I stress the word, this cannot be dismissed as the usual suspects making the usual complaints about BBC bias. An internal document showed bias in BBC output. And up to this moment, the BBC has just been in denial about the reality of that. Yeah. And I do think that, their response to that has been really, truly pathetic. How can you have... They say, oh, well, there's nothing to see here, folks. We're still impartial, etc., etc. Oh, but by the way, the Director General and Head of News are going to resign. Yeah? Yeah. How do those two things match up? The whole thing is farcical.
And I can't imagine a Labour minister being questioned, I'm thinking of the Mandelson affair, and asked something like, what do you think of Mr Mandelson's relentless proclivities for dining with paedophiles? Something as generalised as that. Of course, there would be a reasonable question in that subject, but you wouldn't phrase it like that. And similarly with this, you wouldn't phrase it like that. Listen, always great to speak, Robin. Thank you as ever for your time. Robin Aitken, who's a former BBC journalist. He knows where some of the bodies are buried, that man. Fantastic voice on this issue. Is it the individual we look at? Is it the BBC? What do you make of this? Is it an anti kind of... the BBC are often talked about facilitating reform. I think Nigel Farage has made more appearances on Question Time and Koonsberg than possibly any other politician. So which way round is it? 0344 499 1000. On this issue, let's get a voice note from Ian.
I'd like the BBC to ask Keir Starmer about his relationship with Karl Marx. Also David Lammy's relationship with Idi Amin. Completely fictitious, but then so was the question about Farage's relationship with Hitler.
Yeah, a lot of people making that point. Of course, I say this in no defence. The question was really about his interest in Hitler, not his literal relationship with Hitler, because obviously Hitler would have been long gone. Just to clarify, a few people have made that point. Huey says, well said, Robin Aitken. So good to hear a former BBC man with common sense and decency. Yes, agreed totally. More from you on the way. Don't go away, Matthew in Cheshire. With you in a couple of moments. Lines are open. This is Talk. the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. Watching and listening to Talk just got easier. There's now only one place for the home of common sense. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Matthew in Cheshire. Afternoon, Matthew. What have you got for us?
Hello, mate. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Yeah, in 1983, when I was 13 years old, I was a horrible, horrible boy. I teased people. If you had a weakness, we would all pick on you because that's how it was, and it's not right. It wasn't right at all. It was terrible. But you either got picked on, or you picked on someone. You either got punched, or you got teased. And that's how it was then. It was a different, horrible time. And I've seen people now since I've left, in later life. And I've seen them. I've apologised for my behaviour, how I was, because we didn't know any better then. We was uneducated idiots.
Yeah. And
it was rude and it was horrible. The army made a man of me. That's what sorted me out. But in the 70s and the 80s, it was a different world. My friend who knocks around with himself, now he went to private school, and they were 10 times worse. The stories that you heard that went on in private schools with bullying and how they were and funny little...
all the time, initiations and all sorts of strange things that went, particularly at boarding schools and the like. And none of it is pleasant. No one's defending it, but two things. One is that context of the time of when these sort of things were going on, and two, the age of the perpetrator. We all said or did stuff that we're probably not proud of 20, 30, 40 years ago.
And the people I spoke to and mentioned it said, listen, you tease girls, you tease lads. If you wasn't in your gang, you hear the song Baggy Trousers by Madness, and it was like that in the 70s and 80s at school, very much like they'd go fight in the next school up the road. You wouldn't dream of the things that we did. I smoked at 13. I was going in a pub at 14. And there was no checks. There was just, that's how it was. I'd be mortified if my kids smoked or done anything like that. I've apologised to people for what my behaviour and how I've been. And there's only one person who remembered it, and the rest just forgot about it. And they said, "Oh, I was horrible to him too." It was just how it was.
It did often work. Yeah, it did often kind of work a bit like that, didn't it? You're absolutely bang on. Matthew, thank you very much indeed for that. On the issue of Farage and the BBC and all of this, here's a voice note from Barry.
With all these allegations against Nigel Farage, it's not a point of should he apologise or did he say it. The question that should be asked is, why now? Why now have all these allegations emerged? Why not 10 years ago? Why not at the time of Brexit? It seems very queer to me that they've only emerged now at the point where it looks like he could actually be a Prime Minister. To be honest, it may sound like a conspiracy theory, but this sounds more like an attack on Farage to stop Reform winning than anything else.
And I can't blame you for thinking that, Barry. It did come up. This did come up over a decade ago. Apparently one of the people that appeared on TV who was allegedly on the receiving end of this abuse, I think he said something like he hadn't originally spoken out when it first came up, but what made him speak out was the denial from Nigel Farage, and that angered him. Whereas, I don't know whether he was suggesting an apology would have sufficed. It was the denial of it that he felt was the point where he came out. Look, if an individual had a terrible experience, as Matthew was just saying, you can't take that away from an individual. If that was their experience and that's what happened to them, you can't go, oh, it's just banter, mate. You might have been well bruised and carry it with you for a bit. Stuff like that can happen. Your playground bully can sadly inform the direction of your life, or certainly your disposition as a person, for a long, long time. But both things can be correct. So the person who overheard it or believes it was said to them is absolutely entitled, and it is correct to acknowledge how they feel about that. But simultaneously, you can also say, well, the bully or the person saying something, whoever it happened to be, was also 13. And as Matthew just said, you know, a lot of horrible things get said at that age. We don't define somebody for the rest of their life, nor do we view them as an adult through the prism of as a young teenager. I mean, that would be bonkers. Andy's in Hampshire. We've not got long, Andy, but I'm sure you can do it. What are your thoughts?
Two things. I think the going on about Farage and Nazis, well, Prince Harry dressed as a Nazi for a costume party. We mustn't forget that. Secondly, if Sky Virgin or anybody else can take channels away from me, can they cancel my BBC and iPlayer so I can't get it on my telly? Full stop. Then I can stop paying my licence to these idiots.
There it is. Succinct stuff. You said you'd be quick. Andy, thank you very much indeed for that. Stuart says, I suppose the BBC asking Richard about Nigel's relationship with Hitler and Nigel's anti-Semitism, would that mean that they would then employ him? That's a very good point. Martin in Norwich, Farage is getting targeted by the left-leaning media. Ironically, the actual proven BBC anti-Semitism screened daily over Gaza conflict never gets a mention. It's kind of interesting how it pans out, and again, you're forced into... you could sort of argue in one respect the BBC is just too... It's a bit like the NHS. It's so bloody big that individuals sometimes get it wrong. It's not like there's a BBC plan or a set of people that say, right, this is the line, boys, and everybody takes it. But it is the BBC. It's meant to be held to a higher level and a higher count. We fund it. It's owned by the taxpayer. And yes, as a result of that, its impartiality and its objectivity is meant to be absolute. 0344 499 1000. More calls on the way from you coming next after the news at 2 o'clock.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
And welcome back. Yes, it is the home of common sense. There's a lot to get through here this afternoon. Stay with us. Much to discuss, including that story of Nigel Farage accusing the BBC of hypocrisy. This was after a presenter asked Richard Tice about claims that Nigel Farage made racist or anti-Semitic remarks at school. But the way the question was phrased is what's caused much of the problem, culminating in that extraordinary and many will say understandable riposte from the Reform UK leader yesterday. Does the BBC have a case to answer? We'll take more of your calls and comments on that. You can also voice note us on 0344 499 1000. Also this afternoon, experts have warned the number of illegal migrants in Britain remains unknown as ministers lack basic tracking data. I mean, they don't have numbers for this stuff. And the Home Office does not record human rights-based applications or grants. And even potentially when your visa runs out, there's no way of chasing that up. Nothing goes ping on the Home Office computer. Extraordinary. And the BBC, again, they are backing the European Broadcasting Union's decision to let Israel compete in next year's Eurovision. This comes after some countries are boycotting Eurovision. They include Ireland, Spain, Slovenia and the Netherlands are saying we're not taking part. Well, none of those countries will. Well, Ireland has got a bit of a track record of winning it. I don't know how well Slovenia or the Netherlands have done in the past. 0344 499 1000 is where you'll find us. Our lines are open. This one comes from Susan, who says, I stood for reform in May. I've met Farage. He is not the man that his enemies are trying to make out, and reform is the most Israel-friendly party out there. The BBC is pathetic. This campaign is saying more about the opposition than Farage. And, of course, what's interesting is that people who also don't like Farage argue that the BBC give him more airtime than anyone else, disproportionately so, even before reform was formed. So it's kind of interesting. They're sort of accused of having this both ways. 0344 499 1000. Let's move to this story. Experts, I mentioned this at the beginning, are warning that the UK lacks the data to estimate the number of illegal migrants. Now, extraordinary as this may sound, the Home Office don't have the database that kind of tracks what you think it would be doing. Oxford says this undermines policy planning despite limited data linking progress. Ministers plan higher voluntary return payments and confirmed children of failed asylum seekers can be removed while detention capacity grows and returns have risen since the election. There's a lot of information there. Anyway, let's just stick with the database. Tom Jones, Conservative commentator and author of give us just your Substack, Tom. What's it called?
Potemkin Village Idiot.
Potemkin Village Idiot, right. Glad to give that a mention as well. Listen, Tom, I mean, you might think in the 21st century the Home Office had a big old shiny spreadsheet with all sorts of alarms and bells that go off when certain numbers are reached and someone's breached their visa conditions, and that this whole thing was, counting in real time what was going on our borders and overstayers and the like. Apparently they got nothing there but a calculator.
No, it's absolutely ridiculous. And this is not the first time that this kind of stuff has come up. So previously, the HMRC have recently stopped publishing data on the amount of tax paid by nationality. There's also been a separate decision by the DWP to stop publishing data on welfare claims by nationality. Our immigration debate in this country really takes place in a complete data desert that is simply not true in other European countries that have a much better sense of who is coming in, a much better sense of how much they're earning, and about claims about overstaying. And really, it makes immigration policy much, much, much more difficult.
I mean, almost some would argue impossible, Tom.
Yeah, basically. And for a long time, it has kind of suited a general pro-migration arm of our political class to have that, because you can make claims about, you know, migration being good for the economy that are basically based around GDP, because more people coming into the country means bigger GDP because the size of the pie is increased, there's more people, more economic activity. But if you're not drilling down into, okay, how much money is leaving the country in terms of capital flows through remittances, how much these people are earning, you can basically kind of obfuscate the actual effect on the existing living standards of the host population, which of course is what the host population is concerned about.
Indeed, and the knock-on effect of infrastructure, hospitals, schools, that kind of thing, which of course are all absolutely crucial. I do wonder as well, because this isn't really just a Labour issue, it's a Conservative issue as well, and there is a Conservative type of thinking. Two names that spring to mind will be David Cameron, Boris Johnson, who would be pretty much aligned with Tony Blair on this. They seem to work on the basis that look, it's just a thing, immigration. It happens, people come in, some overstay, they eventually go, most of them do go back, most don't overstay, people come and work, they might be here for life, in which case they become a taxpayer, they might be here for a working holiday, whatever, and it just all pans out at some point. That's the nearest I can get. I know it sounds a bit wishy-washy, nearest I can get to people like David Cameron, George Osborne, his partner in that administration, Boris Johnson, certainly. He once talked about, you know, having a situation where you would, I've forgotten the name of the word now, in London, where you would allow migrants to stay and you'd cut it off from there so everybody could remain from now on, and then you'd start to look at it. They're all very relaxed about it, is the point. But what's the thinking there? They don't really see it as I think they see it as a faff. And if you want to go down that line, you'd be surprised how little you can do to solve it. That seems to be where they're coming from.
So this is something that's actually been discussed by a French anthropologist, I think, called Pierre-André Tajueff. I will have butchered that pronunciation. I am sorry.
It's all right. Sounded good to me.
And he calls this basically an approach of immigrationisme, which starts at the fundamental principle that immigration is a fact and it cannot be stopped, and therefore all your dealings with immigration are downstream from there. And that is very much where our political class has been since mass migration started in the 1990s. But the fact is, it is not true. It is just a policy choice. And even if migration was inevitable, then the individual profiles of migrants do actually matter. Because one of the trends we've seen over the last kind of 10 years is people calling an increasing range of migrants, basically high-skilled migrants, in order to argue that it's good for the economy.
Correct.
But that means, you know, we see people like ballet dancers coming into this country, and we see people who coming in on care sector visas. Care sector work is very important, but it is not particularly highly skilled.
Well, indeed. I mean, and ballet dancing, I'm sure, you know, if you're in the Royal Ballet, is probably pretty crucial. But I don't think you put it down there as a profession that, you know, well, our country would be destitute if it wasn't for ballet dancers. I don't think anybody has ever made that argument, ever. Rudolf Nureyev never even tried. So, yeah, it's ridiculous. But, of course, for those who care about immigration and can see the deeper picture, there's no doubt about it. It's not just a case of reform have come along and put it to the forefront. They, of course, have. But beyond that, I think people can genuinely see that there are issues here, that if we care about infrastructure, if we care about social cohesion, then these are genuinely important subjects. And more when newspapers and journalists ask people, what are your voting priorities based on, whereas it used to be crime and the NHS and stuff, immigration is right up there.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting the way you phrased that question, actually, not a criticism. You phrased it as that reform have brought this to the fore. I would argue it's slightly more symbiotic than that. I think people are across the country, because of the huge waves of immigration that we saw, particularly under the Boris Johnson government, the Boris wave, people are coming into contact with migration more and more and more across a much wider geographical part of the United Kingdom. I mean, I live in lovely, leafy, rural North Yorkshire, and we now are starting to see quite a lot of immigration, you know, for us. And so I think that's really driving people's concern about it, because it's now touching a much wider part of the country.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It was perhaps one of those areas where, you know, politicians would have zero experience themselves, no tangible experience of this. But that tangible experience is now hitting far greater areas. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and I think you can see that especially with the asylum hotels, right, which are, because of the huge number of channel crossings that we've had over the last 5 years, they are now going to increasingly, you know, slightly bizarre, actually, parts of the UK. A lot of the riots that we've had over the migrant hotels are in places that a lot of us have never heard of. And I think you can see basically concern about immigration spreading with the geographical spread of migrants themselves. And so I think that's one of the really untold stories about this migration. You know, basically, there is no better evidence than people with eyes, and with no data about the amount of people that are coming into this country.
Yeah.
You know, people's only understanding of the data really is the number of channel crossings and what that means for them at their local GP service.
Yeah, 100%. The word I was looking for before was amnesty, which Boris Johnson, of course, had suggested an amnesty for long-term undocumented migrants in this country. And so, you know, the idea that Boris was some kind of, you know, he was on it when the borders have never been free. I mean, it made Tony Blair look like a bad warm-up man.
It's incredible to think that Boris Johnson could have actually been worse, really.
Yeah.
I suppose, thank God for Dominic Cummings reining him in.
Yeah, indeed. Who'd have thought that sentence would exist in this conversation? Listen, great to have you with us, Tom. Lovely to speak again. Tom Jones, Conservative commentator, senior fellow at the Centre for Migration Control. Again, you have to sort of put qualifiers in these sort of discussions about why people would be concerned about immigration. It's not about the colour of somebody's skin. Social cohesion and the pull on infrastructure are crucial. And, of course, there's the cost as well. And I think I'm on a hiding to nothing on this, but I kept arguing up until a couple of weeks back that surely put the cultural thing aside, if that is your argument. Put the assimilation thing aside, if that is your argument. The two are kind of interlinked. Just look at the economics of it. Can we afford to spend £6-7 million a day putting up migrants in hotels? And then, of course, there's the pull on all the other elements of the infrastructure, like hospitals, NHS, and things like that. Jill is in Cornwall. Back to the BBC. Jill, what have you got for us? Afternoon.
Oh, gosh. Well, I refuse to watch the BBC. I'm sick to the back teeth of the station. I really am.
Okay.
It's so woke. You name it, it does it. But I understand, I don't know if it's correct, because it was something I caught quickly this morning, that on Question Time last night, the BBC had put... they brought in asylum seekers into the actual audience. And
wasn't that a good thing? I mean, it was an immigration special.
No, it doesn't matter if it's an immigration special. To have a bunch of illegals, that's what you could say, a bunch of illegals actually occupying seats in a situation where you try getting a seat in Question Time. It's like trying to.
But weren't they in the? Because I've read a lot about this online. I didn't watch it. I stopped watching Question Time years ago, in fact,
don't watch it
because it used to drive me nuts. But on this particular point, I did think, right, they're doing an immigration special. They're doing it from Dover. They've got Reform representation. They've got Green Party representation, and they've got all the major parties as well. Was it not journalistically a good thing to go, right, let's literally bring in a couple of the people in the audience, I think one had been given the right to remain, the other's case was still pending. This is from what I've read. Was that not a sharp move, by the way, a rare move of journalistic integrity from the Beeb?
Well, I want to say, yes, it makes sense. But because the BBC is so biased in its views on most things anyway, and because the programmes that it puts out now, I can't relate to, because it just irritates me. And their news nights and their questions and their news broadcasts are very biased. I just don't feel that that they should have people that have floated in illegally.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, why can't they have someone that's come in, gone through the method of coming into the country illegally with a passport and everything else? Why can't they have asylum seekers that are doing the right thing rather than the wrong thing?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. I guess there are, I mean, I can see both ways of viewing that, because I didn't see it. It was only the next day I sort of started to I'm trying to put the pieces together from what I'm seeing in different sort of news outlets and on the wires and stuff. And you're right. I mean, there are two ways you can look at that. You could have still made a very authentic debate without having to do that, perhaps. Listen, Jill, thank you very much indeed for that. As soon as I read that this morning, I thought, oh, they're going to get it right in the neck for this. I mean, people call it bias and rigged. I mean, it's not rigged. I know we can play around with this one, can't we? The Question Time audience is rigged. It's not a BBC programme, by the way. They broadcast it, they don't make it. But they have, and I only know this because I've known enough people that have worked on it. They have these sweat moments on a Thursday where they invite, they get a cross section of people from who are Reform voters. They try to. You don't have to turn up, but they try to get whether it's Reform or Green, so they would get smaller amount of representation in the audience. Conservative, Labour, etc. That's how it was. And then there's a sort of another third of the audience where it could be anyone that shows up. There is an argument that says you'll get more lefties show up for those spare 50 seats than you would righties, or more greenies than you would reformies. I don't know. It's in that kind of ballpark. I know they absolutely don't go, right, boys, let's get out. In fact, someone I used to know that worked for the production company who was, in fact, he's probably a senior figure behind the scenes in Reform by now. So he certainly wasn't rigging any audience members in that respect. But of course, we see sometimes views and scenarios that, fit our own politics. That's sort of irresistible a little bit. And as I said before, the BBC are often criticised for the amount of times they've had Nigel Farage on Question Time, because they have got to, they've got to provide a news programme, but then they've also got to provide one that's going to be reflective of the current narratives out there. So Nigel Farage might be the leader of a party that only has 5 MPs, but he's also a leader of a party that's ahead in the polls. He's also, Nigel Farage, a man that informed the Brexit vote and was absolutely instrumental in the whole thing happening in the first place, under, originally UKIP and then beyond. So there's other reasons you might have somebody on there, but the likes of Alistair Campbell, lost their mind at the BBC at this point. They called it the Brexit Broadcasting Company. They were outraged that Farage would be invited on the BBC on such a regular basis. But to me, it made perfect sense, and it still makes sense in that respect. And I would also say the same for that half-wit Polanski who's running up the Green Party at the moment. They're making some indentations on the spectrum. Don't know why, by the way, but this is democracy. They are. And because of that, not because it's the Green Party, but because it's the Green Party changing. And that's the point of Farage. Farage is kind of centre-right thinking with booster rockets on. So there are other boxes you tick when deciding who you're going to book for those programmes. What you do want is also good speakers, people who are going to be gripping, even if you disagree with them. So there's all of that to, there's no way. I've worked on these things. I know people who've worked on those specific programmes. You will never please everyone in that respect. However, some of those questions that Farage was fired at, certainly the one that Richard Tice got on the Today programme, were off the mark. We can all surely agree on that. 0344 499 1000. The Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. Watching and listening to Talk just got easier. There's now only one place for the home of common sense. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This got 25 past 2. This came in from Mike, who says, Ian, afternoon. 50 years ago, I was subject to anti-Semitic Jew hatred at a boarding school in England. Personally, I put it down to complete ignorance until one day a comment was left on a school Facebook page where a slightly older contemporary brought up the nicknames I was given, stating you were the XXX. Other contemporaries I've met, I've never once brought up this issue, which I've never forgotten. But this one person, probably now aged about 63, thought it was funny to bring it up. Whether there is any truth in these rumours with Farage, I don't really care. Most people grow up and become adults. It's only the odd ones that still have this in them. Surprisingly, he's mixed raced, so you'd think he would know better and to have been brought up in the 70s and the 80s. Yeah, thank you, Mike, for that. And I'm sorry that that happened, and the fact that somebody, because that kind of rather goes against what we would normally say, that, people grow up, they look back at it and go, oh my God, I called such and such this, or we had this horrendous nickname. They don't tend to, 50 years later, they don't go, hey, do you remember how funny it was when we did all that kind of anti-Semitic abuse? Wasn't it hilarious to see the Jewish kid getting, normally have grown out of it by then. Which is why I think you can wear two hats. You can have every sympathy with somebody, a bit like Mike, not that he's looking for sympathy, but every understanding and go, bloody hell, mate, that was terrible. And simultaneously, in most circumstances, go, you know, well, the person that did it was, you know, 10 years old or 12 or something, wouldn't in a million years think that today, apart from the odd person, as Mike just alluded to. Daniel's in Epsom. Daniel, what have you got for us? Afternoon to you.
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
I just want to say I went to a boys' school in sort of 80s and 90s.
Yep.
And, man alive, if you played back every kind of conversation and altercation you had across that period of time, I mean, every single person said, you know, a dozen things every day that they probably wouldn't be too proud of now.
Correct.
And I think what we have to do is take a step back. Why is this happening all of a sudden? And I'll explain why. Because all the big donors are now going to reform, okay? We've had the establishment are absolutely bricking it. They're bricking it because they like us under control. They like the ConLab Uniparty and the establishment. They like us. We've been voting against immigration of all kinds for about 30 years, and they've pretty much gone against our wishes. Now we have the opportunity in this country to really give them a kick in the knackers. And the reformer polling over 30%, okay? Now, if you thought there were shy Tories, let me tell you, there's a lot more shy reformers. They're going to win. I predict now, the revolution will be televised, Ian, but we're all going to witness the biggest political earthquake in UK political history, and I'm going to be at the forefront. I was out leafleting all around Chesington the other day for them, and what it is, it's taking a step back. The British majority, as I like to call them, have had enough now. We have had enough, and we can't keep voting for the ConLab Uniparty and expecting things to work out and do as we ask, even though they work for us. We're all going to vote reform, and we're going to see real fundamental change that we want in this country.
Do you think, Daniel, just 2 points, do you think, when you said that the political earthquake, I mean, yeah, if they won an election, that in itself will be an earthquake. Will it be a majority? They win like a thumping majority, or will they win, become the largest party, but still have to go into bed with the Tories?
Either or. They either get a big enough majority, I don't know, 40, 50 seats or something, or they're helped out by the Tories. But this is what you're going to see more of these stories coming out. Nigel or Richard said something to me in 1975, you know, because they've got nothing else. The ConLab parties, if you are, or the establishment, don't like us. They don't like the common man, the British majority. They don't listen to us, even though they work for us, right?
They don't know what working classes are. I mean, that's something I've discovered, well, through lots of areas of the media, not just the BBC. They think that working class people are what was that programme, Benefit Street? They think that's working class.
Yeah, well, I mean...
They don't know what working class is.
No. Well, my upbringing was a bit like yours. Council Estate, SE21 London, no dad. I lived with my nan and granddad. You know, we didn't have a lot, you know, but we had full stomachs and we looked reasonably presentable when we went to school.
Correct.
But I've done okay in life now. I've turned it around.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the towns and cities I grew up in, Croydon, London, and I'm worried, and I think the British majority are worried about their children's future. And this is something that the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, I can't switch that off, okay? The country has changed for the worse. We can see massive decline and degradation in our towns and cities. The biggest contributing factor of that is mass immigration from the third world. It needs addressing, and the only party that is willing to even look at it, Ian, I want common decency back, because we had it when I was growing up.
But are we going to get... And this was the second thing I was going to ask you. So the other day you talked about, you know, that there was this figure of deporting 1.5 million people, things like that. You see, I don't think any of this stuff's going to happen. That's where my big question mark is. I think we will have a more robust immigration policy, but are you going to really get what you want, Dan?
Well, what I want is forced assimilation, or they can leave. I want everyone in the boat rowing in the same direction. And if you're a Britain hater and you don't love our country like we do, you're going to have to go. And I think if you did a referendum tomorrow, most people would agree with me. Successful nations, the reason that China is going to take over the world is because in China, everyone in the boat is rowing in the same direction. When you get to Britain, we're all rowing in different directions. That's not my cultural heritage. Oh, I'm trans, I'm this, I'm that. Everyone's doing their own thing.
Well, I mean, identity politics has kind of kicked in. It's unfortunate your analogy is based on boats, but I take your point, Dan. Listen, always great to get your view, Daniel, in Epsom. Thank you for that. It's interesting. You get this word racist that's sort of thrown around, and Tom's, essentially talking about Nigel in those kind of terms. Nasty man, and I won't read out all the other stuff because that might be, could be legally delicate. But I remember having an argument once, not an argument, sorry, a really healthy discussion with a proper lefty on this. And Nigel Farage was in the news for something he'd said, and he said to me, Nigel Farage is not this misplaced word racist, by the way. Which, racist, your innate belief that essentially your DNA, your neurological system is superior to another. That's what racism ultimately is, not this idea that you kind of think that cultural differences can be a problem. And he called it, a little Englander, which I still disagree with, by the way, but he said, no, you can be a little Englander. Doesn't make you a racist. But you can also be somebody who believes that the kind of cultural chasm that exists in some areas is completely unhealthy and counterproductive to a good first world flowing economy and a country. You can believe that. You can believe it and shout it from the rafters without being a racist. And I think that's where this racist word gets kind of overplayed. You can really believe that religion has to, if you want to have a religion, a central religion in a country, and if you have smaller religions around, that is fine. They can't be dominant because that is not the religion of your country. You can believe that as well. You can't go around building as many mosques as you like because that is counterproductive to the cultural integration of your country. You can believe that and not be a racist or an anti or an Islamophobe. It might not be everybody's cup of tea, but you are allowed to think those things because you believe it is a country would rub along better if it was run in a different way, which I think is rather Daniel's point. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk in a moment to Jake Wallace-Simmons on that issue of the Eurovision Song Contest. And, I mean, terrible that, oh my goodness, Slovakia won't be performing. How are we going to get through it? Will Graham Norton sign another year? Details next on Talk.
Across the UK on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Well, let's get a word on what is going on with the Eurovision, because it's clearly come to a bit of a head here. But the BBC are backing the European Broadcasting Union's decision to let Israel compete in next year's Eurovision. This is amid boycotts that have happened. Who's on the list? Ireland have boycotted, Spain, Slovenia. The Netherlands is another one. Broadcasters voted against banning Israel and endorsed new rules to prevent government interference, while the BBC said it supports the EBU's collective decision. It would be quite extraordinary, wouldn't it, if people are going to start sort of playing some kind of moral game. And by the way, the minute you go down that rabbit hole, you're frankly lost, because we wouldn't have World Cups taking place in certain places. God knows what else, where you'd end up on this one. So the BBC are backing this decision. Let's get a word with Jake Wallace-Simmons. He is, of course, author of Israelophobia, the newest version of The Oldest Hatred and What to Do About It. That's the longest book title as well, I should add, Jake, isn't it, in contemporary authoring. And thank goodness it's out there as well right now. Listen, I mean, this could be written off as like, it's just the Eurovision Song Contest, who cares who's in it, you know. But there is an underlying serious point in all of this.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm not a great fan of Eurovision either, to be honest. But the thing is, this is a competition that's watched by 160 million people around the world each year. It's a pretty big deal. It's got a 70-year history. And, you know, from Israel's point of view, yes, it's beaten Hamas pretty much. Yes, it's beaten Hezbollah. Yes, it's pretty much beaten Iran. Yes, it's in the strongest military position it's been since 1967. But this soft power stuff really matters. You know, the gradual turning of world opinion against Israel and against Jews has an impact not just on the Jewish state, diplomatically speaking. God knows what will happen once Trump leaves office in the future, but also on everyday Jewish people. I mean, the Eurovision bigotry, let's call it what it is, reflects a bigotry that Jews are putting up with in their daily lives every single day, up and down Britain and elsewhere in the West. I mean, just yesterday, I met a young Jewish student who was born in Israel, who went to a university in London, and in his first week there, he went to a party, told a girl that he was born in Israel, and her reaction was to slap him across the face.
Wow.
I mean, that's an extension of what we're seeing in the Eurovision contest at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, this is all. You can almost see people trying to sort of showcase their worthy whiskers on this one, preening themselves and look at, you know, aren't we fantastic? We've boycotted Israel, and I don't know how the other part of this discussion, you know, Hamas, Gaza, and all that's going on, multiple attacks, October 7th. I mean, we could go on for half an hour just listing all of that. I don't know how that gets sort of eradicated from this conversation somehow, and there's almost no recognition that Israel have been on the receiving end. And, you know, let's remind everybody, as we sit here now, those rockets, I'm sure, are still going over at certain times of the week. So it's curious in that sense. You know, if someone wants to play the moral card, why do they just stop there?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I think that our society has got a very strong message from the forces of Islamism, which is if you try and fight a war against us, even though we provoked it, we're going to hit you with a wave of propaganda that's going to turn your own population against you. Yeah. And that's what Israel has faced. Israel was hit by October the 7th, didn't do anything to provoke it at all. It withdrew from Gaza more than 20 years ago now, and it got October the 7th as thanks, an atrocity on a scale that hadn't previously been experienced since the Holocaust. Yeah. It responded, as any country would have done, with warfare. Warfare is messy. People make mistakes. War crimes are carried out by people on the ground in an army of 300,000 people. That always happens. War is horrible. That's why we try to avoid it. But the message we've got from Hamas is, look, this is what we'll do if you try to wage war against us. We will have the cunning and the preparation and the networks in the West to turn your own people against your war efforts. So thank goodness Britain isn't currently at war with an Islamist regime, but we're not far off it. We've been doing that somewhat in the past. Yeah. If that were to happen again, I really worry, I dread what will happen within our own societies if we were to go to war to protect our own people, whether it's against Hamas or against Putin or anybody else.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's interesting that this Eurovision song thing really acts as a sort of a larger, more symbolic story of something much bigger. I'm bound to ask you, Jake, while you're with us, this Nigel Farage story that's kicking around the news at the moment, that won't seem to go away, came up about 10 years ago, possibly over 10 years ago originally, and now it's sort of made its way back into the headlines. Mr Farage accused of anti-Semitic abuse or anti-Semitic words while he was at school. Where do you stand on this? Because I know it does sort of divide the room. Is it relevant today? Words that somebody said half a century ago? Does it matter specifically what they said? Is there a better kind of bully or a better kind of thing you can say to somebody in an insulting manner than another thing? I mean, what's your overall take on what's going on with this?
Well, I'm afraid my overall take is that Farage made the point himself much better than I could yesterday when he pointed out that the BBC and society at large was pretty much openly racist at the same time as he was accused to have made, alleged to have made those remarks 50 years ago. The BBC was indulging in blackface, in racist jokes and homophobia and all sorts of things. Those things were okay back then in a way that they're not now. And the ability to erase all of that from our memories when looking back only about Nigel and not about anyone else does seem to smack of a political motivation. It seems to me pretty desperate that they're digging so deep, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel this far out from a general election. I mean, what else have they got? They haven't got anything else to throw at him. They're fripped, as Mrs. Thatcher would have said. They're running scared because he represents a huge groundswell of public frustration against the ruling elites in this country and the way that they've driven our country to the dogs. So I think it just goes to show how much Nigel has going for him. I know him a little bit personally. He's never struck me in any way as bigoted or anti-Semitic. Otherwise, I would say so. I think it's just desperation from the outdated political elites who haven't realised that their time has gone.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely bang on. Jake, great to have you on as ever. Thank you. Jake Wallace-Simmons, journalist and author. Thank you to him. It's interesting when you look at the list that Farage mentioned yesterday. He was talking about mainly sitcoms from the 1970s, which were very sexist and racist and homophobic, and they kind of they sort of ticked all of those boxes, and they did it unapologetically, and that was the era and that was the time. Jewish humour, and it's not even Jewish humour. When I think of Jewish humour, you know, I want to think of Joan Rivers. I want to think of some of the, you know, the kind of, well, Woody Allen before, you know, he kind of went a bit weird on us. You know, some of his stand-up stuff was just, you know, stunning. And it transgressed being Jewish. You could kind of get it and buy into it. That was like what you'd call proper Jewish humour. But back in the 70s and the 80s, that's not what Jewish humour was. Jewish humour was comedians standing on stages, either at seaside piers or on TV, doing jokes about people who are miserly with money, and then doing a kind of sort of a sort of half Fagin-like Jewish accent to kind of go with it. And that's what it was all about. Oh, he's a bit Jewish. Yeah, a bit of a Jew. You know, he's a bit of a Jew, isn't he? Oh, he doesn't part with his money. He's Jewish, that one. Don't be Jewish. You know, that was a thing, by the way. It was big. And that was said all over the place. I remember, you know, working on a holiday camp in the summer in Pontins, and the comedians that would, you know, be there doing their cabaret. There was an old guy called Charlie Smithers. There's going to be at least one person listening to me that knows who Charlie Smithers is. But he was, I think, you know, he was one of, he never made it. He never sort of made it into the kind of Frank Carson, Mike Reed territory, but he was known, and he was a very gifted gag teller. He's one of those kind of old school guys, very gifted, bit grumpy, no longer with us, and all the rest of it. And Charlie used to do a whole stream of his friend Jaime. Even you had those names, you know, and he would do this kind of weird sort of Fagin-esque accent, and it was all about, you know, the jokes were all about, you know, miserliness, is that the right word? Money, hanging on to it, not parting with it. And that was so normal. Nobody questioned that. And that was even at a time, by the way, when people were questioning, you know, Jim Davidson for his chalky white voice. That was, at that stage, it was still there. But people had begun to wonder, you know, should you really be doing jokes about that? Should you be doing Indian accents? But a Jewish thing got a free pass. You know, Jews don't count. It's back to the Badil book, right? Interesting. So it was prolific, is my point. And that's not to defend anything that Nigel Farage or anyone else might have said, but it absolutely explains a context of where we were at. And you can't divorce someone's age from it because that's relevant, how old somebody was. If somebody said, you know, when X was 42 years old, they were saying this, you might go, hello. So I wasn't saying it as a kid. It's like when they look through a celebrity's sort of Twitter or Facebook feed and they go, God, look what they said. There's been so many collared like this. Look what they said about gay people in, you know, 2010. I think, oh, that's quite recent. But then you discover the person wrote it when they were like 14 or something. That is a context. That is absolutely crucial to this debate. And that doesn't in any way eradicate someone who might have got hurt on the receiving end of it, because you can hold both views. Dennis is down in London. Reference all of this. Dennis, what have you got for us?
Good afternoon, Ian.
Afternoon.
When I was at school, when I was about 12, I was the only Jewish boy in my school.
Yep.
And there was another guy in my class, and he was a black kid. And we sort of formed an alliance because we used.
Was he the only black kid?
Yes.
Right.
We used to get the bejabbers kicked out of us regularly once a week. And there was three boys particularly who did it, and they were Roman Catholic. After we got finished the beating, did we call them names and say, you, this, that, and the other? Was it right? Was it wrong? No, it was retaliation. Would I say it now? Of course not. So is it right to be held accountable for something that I said 60 years ago?
Yeah.
Obviously not. And this business about Jim Davison and Bernard Manning and all that is absolutely relevant. It was a different time.
It would be really weird, wouldn't it, if we started judging people, like imagine a job interview, you know, at Tesco or something, and they ask you to explain what your views were when you were 10. I mean, that would be really weird.
Well, it's just nonsense.
Absolutely, be complete nonsense. It'd be like, wow. Firstly, you probably wouldn't remember. And if somebody went, oh, well, we've done some digging and we found out that you once called somebody a puff or a word like that. And that, again, would have been a word that got a free pass every day of the week.
I'm just pleased I can still remember. Anyway.
Well, I was going to say... You see, if you can remember... then it's a double-edged sword, that one. Yeah, you can remember, and that's a bonus in itself. Love it. That's a great call, Dennis. Thank you for that, mate. Let's get a voice note on this very issue from Tim.
If a large organisation, say for example The Guardian, wanted to devote lots and lots of resources and money, etc., to going back and trawling through your whole life, back to your childhood, to find something to smear you with, I'll guarantee 99.9% of people, they would succeed. Grow up, these politicians that are criticising Farage. Think about what policies you've got that are going to make this country better, rather than pursuing a genuine man who genuinely wants to make this country a better place for its citizens. Grow up, move on.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Ken. Was it Ken? Tim. Thank you, Tim. Not Ken. I'm sure Tim knows a Ken. Thank you to him as well, for that matter. 0344 499 1000. More calls on the way. We've got a brand new voice of doom as well. I mean, is this what? I don't know if this is a stinker. After the last one went on for 16 days, it went yesterday. Brand new one coming next on Talk. the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. Watching and listening to Talk just got easier. There's now only one place for the home of common sense. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Back with Andrew in just a second. We've got a brand new voice of doom. For those who don't know, it's a mystery voice, but it's political. I don't think this is any kind of spoiler alert, but it's an old one. Have a listen to this.
Instead of searching for work.
Wow. Who's that? If you think you know, 87222. Here it is again.
Instead of searching for work.
I don't know whether you've got to be a student of politics, somebody who is a politician, or someone who's good at taking a lucky guess. I'm not sure which, but if you know who this is...
Instead of searching for work.
87222. We will tell you who it is after the news at 3, but only, and it's completely pivotal on this point, if we get somebody who messages in with the correct answer. 87222, if you know who this is.
Instead of searching for work.
Hopefully, the right answer coming soon. Andrew is in Halifax. On the Eurovision issue, Andrew, are you devastated, firstly?
No, I'm not devastated. Good afternoon. I just think it's pathetic. I really do. Yep. I mean, let's look at two of these countries, if I may. Let's look at Spain and Ireland, OK? Now, Ireland was a country that maintained an illegal claim over UK territory for 62 years. Mm-hmm. It allowed its territory to be used as a base for provisional terrorism, and often it refused to extradite those who've been accused of IRA offences. I don't remember anyone ever calling for Ireland's exclusion from Eurovision. That's one. Then there's Spain. Spain, under Franco's rule for 50 years. 150,000 people murdered there over that period. The only country that ever called for a boycott, I think actually carried out a boycott against Spain, was Austria in 1969. So, the hypocrisy of these two countries with their history.
Yeah. And they were, one would assume, I don't know when the Eurovision Song Contest started, but it's been going since I've been alive. So I would imagine, back in the day, you mentioned Spain and Franco and all that goes with it, that would have been fairly recent stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as I say, the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Relations actually lists Ireland as the most anti-Semitic country in Europe, which is a hell of a stain to have on your character. It really is. And I think in Ireland's case, a lot of it is being promoted by Sinn Féin and its hangers-on.
Well, it's interesting. You think of other areas like footballing and other sporting events. The World Cup in Qatar, the F1 Grand Prix that take place in areas like that, where the probably racetrack was probably built by modern day slaves, let alone what they think of women and gay people and God knows what else. And that seems to get a free pass. No one really blinks at that one.
Absolutely. And even if we want to point the finger at ourselves, we could argue that in 2003, when there was worldwide opposition to us helping America and invading Iraq, nobody ever called for us to be excluded. But you see, we're not Jewish. And where there's Jews, there's news. It's always the case.
Yeah, I sense you're right. There's only one embassy people rally at outside, isn't there? No matter what's going on anywhere else. Get outside the Israeli embassy and kick off and have a proper protest. But a gazillion other things going on in so many parts of the world. When Pakistan were kicking out, I don't know how many Muslims back into Afghanistan and elsewhere, about 1 million Muslims were kicked out. There was nothing. No one turned up at the Pakistani embassy, Andrew. Just didn't happen.
No, and it would never happen. It's never happened with protests over Sudan. It's never happened with the Chinese over the Uyghurs in the west of that country. There is just something laser-focused, and it's this disgusting alliance between the so-called progressive left and Islamofascism, and it's really toxic.
They hate, Jews is news is an interesting line to quote on that. Thank you very much indeed for that, Andrew. Appreciate that. Let's get a word in from Liam in Plymouth. Liam, we've not got long, but I'm sure you can do it. Nigel Farage, what do you think?
Good afternoon, mate.
Hi.
Now, all I'd like to say is all these politicians keep criticising Nigel Farage as what he said as a child. Well, OK, that's absolutely fine then, but all the children in this country that commit murders and crimes like that, well, we'll start trying them as adults then now, and their names will be released into the paper.
It's a great point.
If children are competent as adults, then, OK, we'll treat them like adults.
It's a great point, and it's funny how people want to kind of, have one view on something, and then when you challenge it, and that's why these phone-ins are great, Liam, because people like yourself call in and throw in those really interesting curveballs, and that is absolutely right. If we are going to judge somebody at that age, they knew what they were doing, they were totally in command of everything, they knew about all the risks and all the elements and all the, the moral code, and they were all fully formed in order to get exactly what the score was, then you're right, you'd have to apply that all over the place. Thank you, Liam in Plymouth. Great point. Martin in Norwich, Farage is getting targeted by left-leaning media. Ironically, the actual proven BBC anti-Semitism screen daily over Gaza conflict never gets a mention, says Martin. Voice of Doom, here it is.
Instead of searching for work.
If you think you know who that is, 87222. Right now, it's 3 o'clock. Let's get the latest news headlines.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, 0344 499 1000. We'll continue to take your calls on the Nigel Farage question. He's accused the BBC of hypocrisy, and he's right on this after a presenter asked Richard Tice about claims Nigel Farage made racist or anti-Semitic remarks at school. I mean, that in itself is one issue. The other issue is the manner of the questioning that came out of the Today programme on Radio 4 was, frankly, extraordinary. I think it crosses the BBC code line, whatever you want to call it. No doubt about that. Does the BBC have a case to answer on this? 0344 499 1000. Also this afternoon, David Lammy repeatedly refused to rule out any kind of future customs union with the EU, implying it could aid growth. He's still not letting it go. Is that a good position? If you're a Labour supporter, maybe you think it is. Others would say, mate, it was a decade ago nearly. Also this afternoon, hopes for a Ukraine peace deal are fading as Putin said some points are non-negotiable, demanding Ukraine hand over most of the eastern Donbass, where Russia already controls 85% and continues to advance. Didn't he steal the land in the... I think he stole it. Well, it's actually my land now. Is that how we're going to do business in the 21st century? 0344 499 1000. That's where you'll find us. Voice of Doom on its way. I also want to mention this story as well. We touched on it just there. David Lammy, now the Justice Secretary, repeatedly refusing to rule out a future customs union return. His reasoning behind this apparently is that it could aid growth. Now, this row, of course, comes as the OBR links Brexit to weaker productivity and the Treasury downgrades growth. While some advisors urge exploring a customs union rethink. Critics, however, say it is a backdoor to an EU return. Let's have a listen to Mr. Lammy in action.
Our future is inextricably linked to the European Union, and
part of the customs union.
And we should be working deliberately over time to be closer. That's my view.
Would you like to see us in a customs union or a single market?
That journey of travel to me is self-evident.
So the question, customs union?
That is not currently
Would you welcome
our policy. That's not currently where we are.
But should it be?
But you can see countries like Turkey with a customs union seemingly benefiting and seeing growth in their economy.
Right. Well, it works in Turkey, it could work for us, I think, would be the not unreasonable observation to extrapolate from that particular conversation. In a moment, Peter Wilding, chairman of British Influence, the man who, and he's fed up of hearing this, who coined the word Brexit, did you know? We'll talk to Peter in just a second first. And Annunziata Rees-Mogg, head of communications for Popular Conservatism, also former MEP. Annunziata, always good to have you on with us. I mean, who'd have thought it? The font of all wisdom, the oracle of Delphi, that is David Lammy telling us how to solve all of our problems, just get back in the EU, essentially.
Well, of course. I mean, you scrap juries, you delay elections, and you undo the biggest democratic vote our country's ever had. Suits Labour down to a T. They just don't really like the whole democracy thing. But he's also, his whole argument is so flawed that the UK, for all its ills, is not like Turkey. We are a developed economy. Turkey is still very much a developing one. We are much closer in economic terms to France and Germany. And since Brexit, we have outstripped them. And in the last few years, even more so, that our growth rate is bad, but it's getting worse because of Rachel Reeves. This is a look somewhere else, let's blame something else, a tactic by Labour to do what they've always wanted to do, which was for us to never leave the EU in the first place.
When David Lammy talks in these tones, I mean, he said, look, it's not currently the question. We know that Keir Starmer, not even secretly, very publicly, is out there pressing a lot of flesh over there at the EU. I think he's gained more air miles doing that than he has in his various other foreign trips. There is a sense that some form of new negotiation is taking place. Am I being too cynical here, do you think?
I don't think you are at all. I think you're being absolutely accurate. I think we have long known Keir Starmer's views on the EU and EU membership, and after all, he tried to lead the campaign for us to rejoin. They did every legal lawfare they possibly could in order to prevent Brexit ever happening, which did water down the end effect of what we got in Brexit, which needs to be done more fully and more completely from a democratic and sovereign point of view. But this is all for the birds. That, you know, he quoted the Turkey thing. It seemed to imply that he thinks we get these huge growth rates. There was a paper out this week that said we would get higher growth rates, but that based the forecasts on us being very like America, and it would have put us at double the growth rate of France, Italy, or Germany. That doesn't seem likely. If we're under the same rules and the same restrictions as them. We have an opportunity to do that if we're not. If we did rejoin the customs union, of course, we'd have to scrap our USA trade deal, our Indian trade deal, our Trans-Pacific trade deals, and we would be yet again trapped in the EU orbit, which is the slowest growing trading bloc in the world.
Are you of that belief, and I think you alluded to it somewhere in your answer, that we haven't really got the full Brexit yet?
Completely. That the Northern Ireland issues have not been properly dealt with. Under Labour, we gave up our fisheries yet again, postponing ever taking those back in normal time frames, which we could have done next year. We need to have a Brexit where our producers are free to produce under purely British rules and decide who they trade with. And at the moment, we still kowtow to a lot of EU things, and that also prevents us really taking advantage of our deals with the rest of the world that actually is growing.
On that point, Annunziata, thank you. Have a lovely weekend. Great to have you on with us. Annunziata Rees-Mogg, Head of Communications for Popular Conservatism. Let's speak to Peter Wilding, Chairman of British Influence. Peter, good afternoon to you. Always lovely to have you with us. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine you probably disagree with almost everything you've just heard.
I do. But in some respects, Annunziata is right like a stop clock twice a day. Let's go to where she's wrong, first of all. This government's principal strategy is growth. And nobody is disputing that growth is needed in our economy, and it's bloody difficult to find. Keir Starmer has figures from the OBR all the way to Stanford University telling him that the current Brexit arrangement is losing him between 40 billion and 90 billion quid a year from lost tax revenue. That's huge. It's twice the education budget. And naturally, a sensible government is going to say, how on earth do we recapture that money? Now, the elephant in the room is obvious. We chose a hard Brexit back in 2021, which meant that, as everybody of your listeners know, we have to pay charges for getting post. We have to pay charges on moving furniture across borders. That's a hard Brexit. Our businesses that Annunziata was mentioning, let's try British rules. They don't want to try British rules. That means that only British rules apply, and they want to sell to the world. And European Union rules, and that allowed them, when in the single market, to trade throughout the European Union. So the point here is, if you want the money, you've got to have a solution. And Annunziata had no solution apart from trust ball, more American madness, which happened then. So Starmer has to look at this, he has to find the revenue, and he has to find a way out of this. Customs union, single market are the answers. Everybody knows it, but he can't do it because he's timid. His politics don't allow him, whilst the entirety of the Labour Party want that solution.
How does a country like India seem to be doing so well and growing? They're not in the EU. They would never, by definition, be in the EU. Are you suggesting it's not achievable to be in the EU unless you, live in a certain area of the globe? What's the deal there?
The globalised world means you prosper when you've got scale. Scale India has in droves. the biggest population in the world, the most educated youth population in the world. This is the future for India. We are not a scale country. We've only got 60 million population. And if we want to barricade ourselves behind our own rules, we avoid scale. We had scale in the single market and we prospered very mightily because of it. So that's why India doesn't need to join the European Union. We joined the European Union, the common market, because we thought we believed we would have had scale for our businesses to prosper, and we did. So that is the reason India is not a comparative.
But of course, there are. You'd acknowledge there are trade-offs. Of course, you know, you may well. I mean, one of the problems, the obvious problem, I suppose, freedom of movement, for example. So if you went over to the EU tomorrow, knocked on the door at Brussels HQ, and said, "Hi guys, you know, we'd like to come back, but only for some customs stuff. Is that okay?" And they will say, "Well, freedom of movement, that's up there number one." And you. The argument from the British government would be, well, we're not able to entertain that, and then they would close the door. So there is the problem with it, isn't it? There are maybe some areas that would be beneficial, but of course there's other areas that would be problematic.
Customs union has nothing to do with free movement for a
No,
start.
but it may well be, it's not, no, correct, but it may well be used as, yeah, you can have that, but you have to give us this.
Single market is about free movement. I'm going to tell you a story, Ian. I went to see Theresa May when she was Home Secretary in 2011 and said you can keep membership of the single market and control free movement. There was part of the treaties which allowed you to restrict free movement on grounds of public policy, public health, or public security. We never took that chance. Theresa May told me to her face that it wasn't British and we didn't have the capacity to control it. So we chose not to exercise the power we could have done to control free movement. So we are moving on a steady, baby steps, useless way forward to try and recoup up to £90 billion worth of lost revenue, but without the political will, determination, or credibility to do so. So, Ian, this story is going nowhere because Keir Starmer doesn't have the guts to take it any further, and he doesn't have the power to communicate against a very hostile potential world, Farage included, you were talking about him earlier on, doesn't want to reopen the debate. So he has the prize, but he's too weak to go for it.
Final question, Peter. You obviously would rather we were in the EU still, bells and whistles and all the rest of it. Do you foresee a time when we will return to that bloc? And if so, when?
Things change, cycles of history move. Britain has actually not done too badly out of the EU. That's primarily because, as Annunziata was correct to say, France and Germany have done worse than us. So the figures flatter to deceive us somewhat. Geopolitics is going to change everything, Ian. Britain is a big player diplomatically and in military terms. If I was a British leader right now, I'd say this. I'd follow Macron, who decided to create a European political community and say, let's think bigger than the European Union and try and lead Europe as a continent against Russia. And of course, the man who started this process was none other than Winston Churchill, the man who created the Council of Europe. And wiser leaders than we have now would try and get the bit between the teeth to try and change the weather.
And on that point, Peter Wilding, thank you, sir. Lovely to have you on as ever. I know there'll be many people listening to this that might have a different view to Peter's. They might have a different view to Annunziata as well. What do you think? 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. More comment coming in as well on the other issues. Let's, before we go anywhere else, do the voice of doom. Have we got a winner? This was the voice we played you.
Instead of searching for work.
Now, I think you can tell from that it's probably an older kind of politician. These were some of the guesses. Norman Tebbit. Yeah, I get why somebody might say that. Patrick Jenkin, no. Clement Attlee, no. John Moore, no. Norman Fowler, no. Can we hear it again, Amy?
Instead of searching for work.
Instead of searching for work. We haven't got a right answer, which I know it's devastating, isn't it? Your weekend will not be complete. It means it rolls over to Monday when, well, somebody's getting... look, it took 16 days for the last one, and no reason why this one has to go on for so long. Find out on Monday right here on Talk. Let's go to Phil in Hertfordshire. Talking about BBC Question Time, Phil, what are you thinking?
Good afternoon. I think it was a plant, 100%. So we had one of our one of our visitors that come over on a boat. He starts straight away playing the emotional blackmail bit about, oh, you know, what about your human rights as well? It's going to affect you as well.
Yeah, I saw that clip.
Yeah, and then he mentions Northern Ireland and starts talking about Northern Irish politics. Like, really? So
I didn't see that. That sounds.
Yeah. If you
so he was off on a proper old rant here.
He was. Yeah, he actually mentioned Northern Ireland and what happened over there. So a guy's come over on a boat from a war-torn country, looking for asylum and a safe haven, but he knows all about Northern Irish politics, does he? Of course, it was a plant, Ian. And anybody thinks it wasn't has seriously lost the plot.
Well, that would. I mean, you could take that to. You could have somebody put in jail probably for it, Phil, if you want to pursue it, because it would be career-ending if they had literally planted somebody. What they probably did was research somebody who had a lot of political views who also happened to be an asylum seeker.
Well, OK, there's maybe, yeah. I mean, and I know a lot about astrophysics as well. Of course I don't, but if I can read something off of my mobile phone, then I can read it.
Well, he would have had it on his mobile phone because he was allowed to prepare a question.
Yeah, I know. Look, tongue-in-cheek, Ian,
I get you. It was a bit weird. I'm totally with you. It was a bit weird, but I also understand why you might want someone, God, if I was doing a debate right here on, and I know we're not the BBC, we've got different, it's a different format and genre and all that, and somebody said, oh, by the way, there's an asylum seeker we can get on, I'd have jumped at the chance,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he didn't come across as genuine. This is what I mean. He didn't feel right, Ian.
I know, yeah, but wasn't he the one who'd been here about 5 years or something?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know how many how many they had in the audience who were of that requirement in terms of the debate. Listen, I get it. Phil, great call. Thank you very much for that. On a similar point, Laurie says a quarter of the audience can turn up on question time. I don't know. A third, sorry. I said a third as a random figure. I don't know what the number is. I don't think you can just turn up at the door. I think you've still got to apply for a ticket. The point is, because they do this weeks in advance, don't they? The point is they actively look for representation for the different political parties. I don't know if that's relevant to who's on the panel or just generally. And then there is just the general ticket. So it might be a quarter. I no idea at all. But there's a number for that. So I must be in a time warp, says Laurie. Ian, sorry, total cobblers. Majority of your callers would never, ever be allowed on question time, says Laurie. But you wouldn't get... There's no way they could vet you on that, in that respect. They couldn't vet you on that. And by the way, they don't have massive audiences in those things. So if they've got 20 spare tickets and they go, right, here's 20 tickets for question time, who wants them? You apply I imagine on the BBC website or the production company's website. And if you get them, you get them. I mean, but the idea they're going to go, right, OK, tell us your politics and give us your last voting card. I mean, can you imagine the faff and the jip for that? There's some... flipping work experience kid who's told, right, get the audience and get the right ones. And, of course, it goes higher than that, but you take the point. The failings of question time are multiple, but that isn't, oddly, that isn't actually at the top of the list. But I can see why it can come across that way. And the panel themselves, they get accused of having panels that are too right-wing or too left-wing. It's weird when they put a celebrity on questions. Do they still do that thing of sticking somebody kind of bit, sort of Eddie Izzard will suddenly pop up on the panel or someone like that? That's always mysterious. Maybe I should watch the one back from yesterday. I've just seen clips of it because it seems to have been doing the rounds. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. Watching and listening to Talk just got easier. There's now only one place for the home of common sense. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 3. Mike says, all this talk about Nigel Farage is all about how leftists will continue to witch hunt on anything to avoid Reform UK as our next government, which is completely worse than what Nigel did 50 years ago. So to me, it's so childish and unprofessional. We have to listen to until the next election. I mean, it is, again, if a story is 50 years old, you can't just extrapolate that from the conversation. Go, right, so 50 years old, somebody was like 13 or something, said something in the playground. Here's what we're going to do now. We're going to just investigate all the MP. In fact, I'll tell you what, let's make it easier for the haters. Let's just investigate sort of the 10 most senior representatives of each party. So we'll get the 10 the 10 shadow cabinet ministers of the Lib Dems and the Tories. So you'd have your Jenricks and your Kemmies in there. Then we'll get the 10 front bench, Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, Lammy and co. We will do a mass investigation, an archaeological dig, the likes of which you've never seen, of something those people said in 1975. And we'll invite friends and anyone they went to school with. We'll talk to the teacher. Do you ever remember that time? You remember the time when Lammy showed his backside in the science lab and went all funny with a Bunsen burner? You know, that kind of... Really? And then he shouted... Should we do that? Because that, I think, would be the only way to quench the thirst of those, particularly on the left, who want some... You know, we're looking at this like they've just broken the Watergate scandal. I mean, extraordinary stuff. Wayne is in Southampton. Wayne, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
I agreed with that last caller. I haven't watched the episode, but I've heard it on the radio this morning. I think it sounded a bit sus as well.
Well, it was somebody who was booked, I think, but not somebody who's necessarily a plot. I mean, if you want somebody who's an asylum seeker, you're going to obviously... You're never, as a producer, going to go, yeah, just sit there, mate, and we'll come to you at some point. You need to probably know a bit about their story and what they're likely to say.
So I've applied to go on there before, and you had to apply online. Then they emailed you or called you, and then you had to submit a question up front about what you wanted to ask. If you didn't want to submit a question, you couldn't go on. It just didn't sound, from what I've heard on the radio.
Yeah. I'm going to have a listen back to that. I'm going to have a listen back.
And did he say he's been here 5 years?
No, I heard somebody say earlier that the guy had been in the country 5 years.
Yes, I think he did say that. I think they asked him and he said that. That puts it at early 2000s. And did we have many people coming over then in COVID times on the boats?
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. I would imagine somebody would have said to him, Wayne, right, write down your question, mate, and make sure you've got something to say. Otherwise, you're going to look stupid. You're speaking in slightly broken English, and that's always tricky on a television format. So they might have coaxed is the wrong word. Might have encouraged him to sound as fluent as he possibly could, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, but I thought how he answered the question was more like someone that was probably been here quite a bit longer.
Well, you do, yeah. I mean, that's possibly true. Or you might even find that he's also the head of a charity or something that support. He's the spokesman for Migrants Are Us or something.
Yeah. Just if it wasn't the BBC, you'd probably think it's a bit more believable.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, well, it takes us down that road, doesn't it? I mean, that's the problem the BBC have got, is that we are, something that 20 years ago, Wayne, would have been unthinkable, that we'd be discussing whether a top political programme is a bit iffy. We shouldn't be talking about that at the BBC like that, should we?
No, and they've left themselves open for that criticism.
Completely, absolutely spot on.
They didn't do that last night.
Yeah.
They could have waited till things died down a little bit and maybe then done it, but yeah.
Who knows? Listen, I'm now forced to watch it back, I think. Listen, Wayne, great call from Wayne in Southampton. All I know is that I heard I was watching the TV and what's her name? Bruce Wayne, who presents Question Time. Fiona Bruce. Bruce Wayne was Batman, by the way. Fiona Bruce does that thing of saying, after the news, Question Time is on, and we're going to be live in Dover doing an immigration special. I thought, I can't wait to hear who's on here. And she mentioned Zia from Reform UK and Zach from the Greens, and then I think she said, and all the other major political parties. And I thought, that's pretty, they got Reform and they got Green on, and they're two interesting parties. But that's as much of Question Time as I saw. And then, since I've been in the office, there's been some clips going around of those particular questions. But now I feel I've got to watch it. Oh, don't make me watch Question Time. I mean, I seriously go. It used to be a must-watch thing, right? I mean, it's one of those things, Thursday night. I used to record it if I was going to be out. I couldn't wait to watch it. And it's kind of gone. I don't know. It's because we live in a world where there is so much opinion out there anywhere. Programmes like this, 24-hour news, social media. So hearing opinions doesn't really sound that odd now, does it? It doesn't sound like, wow, it's a politician speaking not in the House of Commons and not on an interview around a table. There's some classic Question Time moments. Weird ones, good ones, cringy ones, all sorts out there from over the years. But it's sort of lost a bit of a mojo over time. And that Newsnight thing, I couldn't believe it when I discovered that still exists. Apparently it's about 8 minutes long. It's more like Newsround than Newsnight. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk to the former head of the British Army in a few moments' time, reference Ukraine. Find out more coming next.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
The BBC is getting a backlash and not the person who said racist comments. What says Michael? I think that's reference Nigel Farage. I think Nigel Farage is getting quite a bit of a backlash on this. I don't sense for one second those that don't like Nigel Farage are somehow letting him off the hook. I think he's fully on the hook, which is why it's being debated. And he's made his comments known, and you know what he did half a century ago. Others can have their own views, of course. Also, this story, hopes for a Ukraine peace deal are fading, it seems, as Putin has said that some points are non-negotiable. He's demanding Ukraine hand over most of the eastern Donbass, where Russia already controls 85% and continues advancing. Let's get a word from Lord Richard Dannett, former head of the British Army. Richard, always nice to have you on with us, sir. Great to have you with us. I mean, this is rather extraordinary. You're a military man. You know how these things work. As a complete objective onlooker, we're in very weird times when somebody invades a country and then suggests, I'm sorry, there's a bit of a stalemate because you won't give me some of what I've stolen. Is that more or less the Janet and John type précis of where we're at?
I think from Putin's position in the Kremlin, I think that's exactly right. I mean, he seems to completely be oblivious to the fact that, contrary to the accepted rules on which the world operates, that he has invaded the sovereign territory of another country. He's captured a certain amount of it, and he's saying, oh yes, we can have a peace agreement, but actually I'd like a big chunk more. And not surprisingly, President Zelensky, and now most recently his head of armed forces, are saying, no, this is unacceptable. We're not prepared to give up more territory with 4 million more of our population to go under the Kremlin's rule. So I'm afraid Donald Trump and his negotiators, in their bullying, if you like, of President Zelensky, and then taking the message to the Kremlin, have been deluding themselves that there was the basis of a peace agreement at all. I'm afraid we have to stand with the Ukrainians, and they're standing up for their rights quite properly.
Indeed, of course, the Russian position would be, I would imagine, well, hang on, this was already ours, frankly, and most of the people in this particular region speak Russian. Most of them will support Russian-led administration. So, you know, why would that be controversial? That, I would imagine, be the kind of thing President Putin would say to you right now.
Yes, he probably would say that. But I'm afraid that flies in the face of the agreements made after the end of the Cold War, when there was a discussion, yes, you're right, whether the Donbass provinces would be Russian or whether they would be Ukrainian. But it was decided that they would be part of Ukraine. The United Nations agreed that. Various countries guaranteed the freedom of Ukraine, of which Russia and America and the United Kingdom were three. And it was agreed by international treaty that those Donbass provinces would be Ukrainian. So they are Ukrainian, they're sovereign Ukrainian territory, and it's not up for Donald Trump, sorry, it's not up for Vladimir Putin sitting in the Kremlin to say, well, they should have been ours anyway. Yeah. That's his version of history. That's not how international law sees it. And frankly, he is in the wrong, and he can't argue his way forward. Yes, okay, they're fighting their way forward, not as successfully as the media would actually have you think. Their casualties are phenomenal. Over 1,000 a day killed and wounded, over 1.15 million killed and wounded during the course of this war. It's an horrific toll that the Russians are paying, and the Ukrainians too.
But of course, the Russians don't really care about that, do they? Their sort of their definition of collateral damage, even if it's their own, is arguably broader than most places. So for Putin, he's quite relaxed about the fact that a few thousand of his own people might die.
Well, Ian, you're right. Actually, it's not just a few thousand, it's many hundreds of thousands of his people.
A few more, I should say.
And they're quite crafty about the way they do this. They recruit largely from the eastern provinces of Russia. They avoid the sort of more westernized people around Moscow. they pay them large bounties for joining, and if they are killed, then their families are paid quite a large bounty. But if they complain, that money is taken away. So the noise, if you like, of the mothers of Russia is being muted by money being thrown at the problem. But that doesn't take anything away from the fact that it's outrageous that Russia has launched attack on a sovereign country, its neighbour. And quite rightly, we are supporting the Ukrainians to fight back and to hold their own.
How do you see this ending, Richard? I mean, this is sort of the never-end, the Gordian knot, the never-ending, you know, the immovable object, the cul-de-sac, whatever we want to call it. Is there an answer out of this? Because, you know, I don't think it takes a military expert, a historian, a politician, a president to be able to see that everybody wants to, you know, Ukraine want to come out of this with Ukraine intact as it was just a few years ago. Putin wants to come out of this with his head held high. Both of those things can't be possible, can they?
Well, going right back to February 2022, one has to accept that the position of Putin and the position of Zelensky were mutually irreconcilable.
Yeah.
And where we are now is, if we accept that there is no basis for a ceasefire or a peace agreement today, then frankly, we in the West European countries, hopefully also supported by the United States, have got to continue supporting Ukraine. And that means further sanctions on Russia, freeing up the frozen Russian assets that this country and other countries have to use to provide more weapons and support to Ukraine, for the Americans to agree the Ukrainians can have and use long-range weapons, and that we give them more ammunition, more weapons and more training and more support. And I think the combination of those things, as bloody as it will continue to be, will eventually put more pressure on Putin, such that he may feel that he's got to stop this war because the pressure on him from his own people eventually may prevail. Otherwise, this is going to continue in the way that it is for quite some time.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a parallel here. The Korean War, which started 75 years ago this year, stopped with a peace agreement, with a ceasefire rather. There has been no peace agreement. There are still 25,000 American troops in South Korea guaranteeing that ceasefire. It could be that that's how this war in Ukraine stops. It literally stops on the front lines, but there's no peace agreement, and the status quo as it is just continues. It's unsatisfactory, but otherwise, it goes back to what I said just now, we've got to heap more pressure on Putin, more pressure on the Russians, and hopefully bring them to realise that they've made a terrible mistake and they ought to withdraw.
And at the moment, the curious nature of the sort of geopolitical world we currently exist in, Richard, as I'm sure you've not lost on you, we have an American president who can change his mind just like that. So it appears that he's a little more team Putin at the moment. But of course, the way Mr. Trump operates, it could be a week's time when he suddenly says, I can't deal with this man. He's absolutely mad. He'll probably even use those words. So, you know, Zelensky is right to ask for this, and the Russians are being unreasonable. It's a fast-moving story and somewhat of an irrational one as well.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the irrational actor in all this is Donald Trump. I mean, Vladimir Putin, we know exactly where he's coming from, where he wants to go. We know what President Zelensky has got to do. But Donald Trump is mercurial. Now, he has always wanted to try and put it about that he could do business with Vladimir Putin. They could do a deal. You know, I'm a businessman and I can do a deal with you. But, you know, he was on record a couple of months ago to say, I think Putin is tapping me along. I think Donald Trump must actually realise in his heart of hearts that Putin is playing his own game, and that actually he's playing Donald Trump along, and that there is no basis of a ceasefire or a peace agreement on the basis of what's been on the table recently. It is tragic. It's tragic for Ukraine, but I think in all our own wider interests, as far as the security of Europe is concerned, we've got to go on supporting Ukraine, supporting them in their fight against the Russians, and hopefully the Russians will realise that they've made a terrible mistake. Whether it'll be under Putin or whoever follows him, Well, we'll find out.
Indeed. Richard, thank you for your time, sir. Really appreciate that. He is Lord Richard Dannett, former head of the British Army. Certainly knows his way around military operations. Your thoughts on that as well? 0344 499 1000. Back to issues of Farage and Question Time and the BBC. Goodness me, the list goes on. One from Dan says, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Back when Farage was a teenager, the BBC were airing a programme aimed at teenagers where one of the characters used racial slurs continually. Gripper on Grange Hill used a now taboo word to describe Benny. I remember both of those characters, and also called Mr. Baxter a now inflammatory name. Wow. I'm trying to remember which one was Mr. Baxter. Was he the bald one, or was he the old guy with the glasses? But Gripper, I remember. Is Gripper the one whenever they try to do a Grange Hill reunion of some kind, they can't ever get Gripper on? They can't either locate him or he doesn't want to, you know, he's moved on, doesn't want to talk about, I don't know. But Dan is absolutely right. And of course, Nigel Farage gave a whole list of other programmes that were around at that time, which kind of, sort of denoted the kind of atmosphere and the comedic tastes of the day, which were very much based on kind of exploiting people's either their ethnicity or their religion or their sexuality, and the lexicon that was employed in order to make that, inverted commas, funny, was extraordinary. But it wasn't extraordinary then. You know, some of this stuff I would have watched as a kid. I mean, Are You Being Served was flipping hilarious. I mean, it was really funny, but it was very camp and loaded with homophobia. I mean, that doesn't even include Mrs. Slocum's Pussy, of course, which was the constant gag. But that was more about kind of, you know, being a bit smutty than it was the double entendre thing. But all the other stuff with John Inman and goodness knows what else. I mean, it was loaded with that kind of material. I mean, to an extent, It Ain't Half Hot Mum was as well. To an extent, even Hello, which brings us into the sort of 90s, I'm tempted to say. You know, the Perry and Croft kind of sitcoms that put all that stuff together did have that kind of slightly saucy seaside postcard flavour to them, and everything that went with it. And that did include what you'd look at today and go, I can't believe they used to say stuff like that. Didn't they recently show Friends to, like, some sort of 15-year-olds who'd never seen it, who were absolutely devastated because they couldn't believe anything so outrageously sexist and homophobic and God knows what else. This was Friends, for God's sake, a sort of popcorny sitcom that was a little bit funny in places. But it certainly, you know, grabbed the... Alicia, our producer, says it was very funny. There was a little bit of a male-female divide on that, a little bit of one. I think that's fair to say. But it was... Yeah, I mean, you liked it or you didn't like it. But apparently some younger groups see it and think that some of the themes and some of the humour in it are now a little bit off compared to where we should be. This one comes in from Lady Anne. Reference Question Time and the asylum seeker in the audience, where I said they probably encouraged him to write his questions. She said, encouraged him, they actually wrote the questions for him. I mean, I can tell you, they didn't. I can promise you that. But if you're making a programme, you can't have some stumbling, mumbling character, whoever they happen to be. You're booking an asylum, so he's kind of like a booked guest. I don't think they hid away from that. Fiona Bruce even said in the clip I saw, you know, I spoke to you before the programme. They would have made sure he was coherent, basically, because he was speaking in another language, well, in English, but not his first language, and it was fairly broken English as well, with a fairly strong accent too. But they wouldn't have written... It didn't matter if they did write a question, really. That's the question they would have wanted. It's the question that was needed for the debate. But, yeah, I mean, people will have their own views, clearly. More comment from you. Let's go to Paul in Newport on Farage and the BBC. Paul, what are you thinking? Hi.
Good afternoon, Gene. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm all right, thank you. Yeah, nearly the weekend. Far away.
Nearly the week. We're always happy on a Friday.
We are.
With regard to BBC and that, surely once a state broadcaster chooses to report the news with a particular slant or bias, that becomes propaganda. And if you start looking at, like, you know, North Korea and China, I mean, they've almost managed to brainwash entire nations.
Yeah.
Now, I don't like the word propaganda because it has these sort of horrible sort of connotations, but if the state broadcaster, which the BBC is, okay, if they're saying we're gonna report this in a particular way that other people aren't doing at the time, more often than not, the BBC sort of choose to put their head above the parapet. But doesn't that become propaganda? And you're sort of trying to convince a nation to do and think in a particular way.
It really does. I mean, there's no other answer to it. I mean, there's always that question which I mentioned at the beginning, Paul, and I wrestle with this one a bit. There are occasions, do we blame the BBC or do we blame the individual that did something? Now, if it's a live broadcast and somebody on the One show says something that's a bit off or a bit political, then you can't go, oh, that's the BBC speaking. No, it's just the presenter on the One show, whether it's that former footballer or Alex Jones, whatever her name is. But if it's the news, then you're in different territory.
Yeah, but if you know that the person that's representing your company, your country, no matter what it is, so if you put someone to front of house, as they say, and you know they have a particular way of saying things or have particular thoughts about things, then you've done that by choice. You've made a decision. You've made a sort of a directorial decision or an editorial decision.
Yeah.
To put that person, like you were talking about, was it Emily or something, the girl who you quite like, but she sort of started this.
Emma Barnett
with Hitler.
Yes.
Emma, that's it. Well, they must know what Emma's like, and if you put Emma with her thoughts in front of someone who has sort of like differing thoughts and opposing thoughts, don't be surprised if Emma says something out of...
But Andrew Neil used to go, and this is why it's an interesting debate, because I don't know if you caught me saying it earlier, Paul, but we've previously played clips of Emma Barnett because she has brilliantly destroyed a politician.
I've watched it,
and thought, wow, she's good. Do you know what? I'm going to just be upfront about this. When I worked with her at the old place, she didn't really jump out as being that kind of journalist. She was like a kind of fairly middling, sort of taking calls. She was very fluent, clearly very bright. And then she goes off to the BBC and probably found her footing, and she's, largely been incredibly impressive. But that one question, it overstepped the line because it was a loaded question, it was a mischievous question, and the BBC have no right to do that.
But aren't the BBC, by virtue of the fact that they are the national broadcaster, aren't they supposed to tread this neutral line?
Well, they're meant to, but Andrew Neil, when Andrew Neil was doing like the daily politics and stuff like that, and I used to go on that show from time to time, you had Andrew Neil, who's clearly a man of the right. He used to edit the Sunday Times, and
I like him,
you had Robbie Gibb, who I know very well. He's a mate. Robbie was in charge of Westminster, went on to work for Theresa May, lifelong Conservative, Brexiteer, you name it, all of those things. They were also accused of advancing a right-wing agenda, even though, if you watched Andrew Neil in action, you actually would never have seen a right-wing agenda.
Don't you think, though, Ian, that we keep talking about only fools and horses? I mean, I watch a programme pretty much every night on UK Gold, what it's called, right?
Yeah. Is that still going?
You know it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on.
Rising Damp.
Oh, that's an absolute belter.
Rising Damp with Rigsby, who's a landlord, and Philip, who pretends to be the son of an African chief.
Correct, yeah. He's the well-educated black guy who's one of the lodgers, along with Richard Beckinsdale, who's the other lodger.
Well, Rigsby, they actually put before the programme starts, it says, the views or the words used in this programme reflect a different time. Okay. Now, clearly, UK TV Gold understand what they're putting out.
Yep.
They know that. They know what's going there. They know what's in that particular programme, that episode. And they put a thing out saying, look, just please, we don't mean to offend anyone, but this is how it was when this was filmed. Now, if we understand that, and UK TV Gold can put out something that says, hey, it might be a bit iffy, but this is what we do. Well, the BBC, their bar needs to be far, far higher than UK TV.
100% it does. 100%. And I tell you what, it's worth mentioning, is that not one of the greatest comedy performances of any actor of any time? Leonard Rossiter as Rigby is just an absolute stunning. Paul, I've got to move, just because we've hit the clock and overshot. Lines are open. This is Talk. Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. Watching and listening to Talk just got easier. There's now only one place for the home of common sense. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one comes in from Becky, who says, if I was Nigel Farage, I'd be asking the BBC why they haven't been questioning Keir Starmer when there's apparently an intelligent, clear-thinking adult at the age of 18 had a relationship with the communist bloc by actually going and working with them. I think Czechoslovakia, as it was then. Why is no one actually hijacking an interview or press conference and asking Starmer those questions? Now, I suppose, and Alex Phillips is with us, who is a spokesperson for Keir Starmer. What is the Prime Minister thinking?
I say this myself all the time. I'm like, do you not think it is, like, notable that our current Prime Minister, during a war that, OK, so no shots were fired, but it was such a tense period of time, especially when it comes to developing weapons, sharing intelligence, so on and so forth, that during the Cold War, where we spent trillions trying to eradicate communism, old Starmer, now he went on gap year, didn't he?
Went on a gap year down commie way.
Digging wells down Africa. He was like hanging out with the commies, working for a spy.
He was literally living
like,
in communist high street.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But I suppose he would say, well, you know, you're allowed to do that. But I mean, I would argue that actually the dangers of communism are pretty flipping serious.
Look, what I would say is, who cares whether Nigel Farage says something politically incorrect in the playground? If he's not done anything since then as adult, if you haven't got the receipts of it, it's fine. Yeah. The thing is with Starmer, it shows clearly that his ideology was extremely communist to take the step of going to a blooming workers' camp, and it still is. That's the point. It still is.
Well, it's quite interesting, isn't it, when you get... Was it Michael Portillo that was once used to hand out Socialist Worker Party newspapers, or am I malign? I'm sure
Portillo, of all people.
Was Mandelson once a bit of a Tory? I don't know.
Most of the Labour sort of bigwigs have sort of done their time with... They've
done their bit.
Very suspicious institutions.
And a lot of Conservatives, I suppose, you know, lots of people were... when I was about 17, 18, a bit of a lefty, because me and my mate lived in a shared house, and we thought that's kind of what you did.
Sharing a house when you're young doesn't make you left-wing, it just makes you young.
No, but we used to just drink a lot and moan about, you know, and smoke a lot. And
that makes you right-wing.
Do you think so? Yeah, but, well, it does in the sense that we were responsible for our own rent and everything, and food and everything that happened.
The leftists are all like kumbaya and...
Yeah, we never did any of that old
knit some
lark.
hemp and, stuff like that.
Never knitted anything, not even a scarf.
No one wants to knit anything.